It all begins with humanity attracting dark creatures through their miasma. Because of this, terrible monsters known as demons began to appear on Earth. The power of these creatures was absurdly immense and devastating. As a result, they took countless human lives over the centuries. Despite the destruction, the gods decided not to abandon humanity to their fate. To help them fight, the gods gave humans manifestation blades, which are weapons infused with divine power. Those who wielded these weapons became known as demon hunters, constantly protecting everyone's peace. And at the very top of all these warriors fighting against evil stands the strongest existence of all and the great symbol of this entire era. He is known to everyone as the Sword Emperor. Led by the Sword Emperor of each era, the hunters fought endlessly to save the world, moving to the present day. The current emperor says you can recognize a good hunter right away. The assistant asks him to hurry up and choose a candidate from the academy, but he thinks they are all boring. He reveals that he is looking for someone with a massive ego, since only those do not break, sounding almost like a villain as he says this. The assistant gets annoyed watching his tea commercial and agrees to wait until the next day for a decision. The assistant begs one more time for him to make a quick decision regarding the recommended candidate. This is the current Sword Emperor, Kaname Akuta, who keeps contemplating what he should do. Meanwhile, the daily routine continues as normal at a local city school. A chubby student runs frantically. Terrified of being late for class, he activates a technique and kicks the air to gain speed, startling everyone nearby. However, he ends up bumping into another boy who flies straight into a pile of trash bags. This is Haruto Kamakiri, 17 years old, who complains that the other guy should just run normally on the street. Haruto stands up, brushing off the dirt, while watching a mother say goodbye to her daughter named Rika. The mother explains to her friends that she walks her daughter because child abductions involving blade wielders have increased recently. The little girl proudly shows off the glowing mark on her wrist, surprising the other women. They agree that an escort is important, since the girl is now practically a national treasure. That is because those chosen by the gods receive a revelation and gain a special blade. To receive this divine calling, a person must strictly possess spiritual energy. However, as with every rule, there are always a few exceptions along the way. People gossip about Haruto having absolutely no spiritual energy in his body. They also comment that his parents passed away in an accident and that his aunt and uncle suffered a lot because of it. After all, spiritual energy serves as a beacon for the gods to find the chosen ones. Haruto is already tired of always hearing the same malicious comments from people. The woman continues whispering about the nickname everyone usually gives the boy. He is called the one abandoned by the gods, a title he has carried for as long as he can remember, lacking the energy common to everyone else. He is treated as defective with no place in the world. He knows very well that he is weak and hears his classmates mocking him for being unable to use simple techniques. During gym class, nobody wants to pair up with him, and he no longer expects anything from life. Suddenly, his classroom desk is kicked with great force by a bully. The attacker greets him sarcastically, starting yet another session of daily harassment. The bully smiles mockingly and tells them to play around a bit more that day. Haruto simply swallows his anger, knowing that these humiliations seem to never end. The bully uses a wind technique and lands a heavy blow that sends Haruto flying. Haruto flies through the air and ends up crashing violently right into the middle of the school trash cans. The attackers celebrate the strike as if it were a bowling game and laugh at the boys. Situation: Haruto groans in pain on the ground and tries to stand up slowly while the bullies keep laughing. The gray-haired boy shouts at him to get up quickly because the fun is not over yet. Lying on the ground, Haruto feels he has reached his physical limit and cannot take any more beatings. The attacker calls for the group leader, complaining that Haruto is ignoring their orders. The leader of the group, a strong blonde boy named Hibiki, decides to step in. He steps heavily on Haruto's head and says that today he will be treated like a ball. Hibiki presses the boy against the ground, asking in an intimidating tone if he wants to make him look like a liar. Suddenly, he manifests his glowing, flaming sword. Complaining about the boy's attitude, he says he just wants his friends to have a comfortable school life while threatening him with the blade. The other two bullies whisper in fear that Hibiki is crazy and even has ties to the Yakuza. He touches the hot blade to Haruto's hand, making him scream in desperation and beg him to stop. The attacker pretends to cry and sadistically asks if he will need to burn his other hand too. Desperate from the intense pain, Haruto gives in and screams that he agrees to be his ball. The gang leaves laughing, leaving the poor boy lying on the ground, asking himself why it always has to be him. Crying in frustration, he does not understand why he has to go through this humiliation without having done anything wrong. Just then, the school supervisor appears, shouting to find out what was going on there. The bullies decide to leave, and one of them confirms that he has already prepared everything for that night. The staff member sees the scene and sighs, tired of seeing Haruto involved in trouble again. He looks at the boy with disdain and complains that he is only good for causing problems. The man orders him to clean up all that mess, leaving the boy upset for being blamed once more. He realizes that he is completely alone and has no allies in that place. Haruto admits to himself that he gave up on asking others for help a long time ago. Meanwhile, the radio reports that a massive demon portal has appeared in the Tohoku region. The news reports that a giant demon appeared, but the Emperor acted quickly and prevented the worst. Little Rika watches everything on her phone and excitedly tells her father how incredible he is. She tells her father that she wants to become a hunter to protect everyone in the future. The father supports his daughter's dream, while Haruto watches them from a distance and recognizes her from that morning. He sighs bitterly, wishing he also had spiritual energy so he could just be someone ordinary. Suddenly, a loud noise startles the girl's father, who demands to know who those men are. To Rika's horror, her father is cowardly attacked from behind with a sword strike. The kidnappers tell the girl to shut her mouth and begin gagging her to throw her into the van. Haruto hears the screams and peeks in fear, immediately recognizing one of their voices. He sees the man severely injured on the ground, losing a lot of blood after the cruel attack. Looking closer, he recognizes the flaming sword and realizes that Hibiki is the one responsible. The criminals close the vehicle door and speed away quickly to escape with the girl. Haruto takes a step forward, trying to shout for them to wait, but freezes in fear. His mind goes into full panic, thinking about calling the police and looking for witnesses. He despairs upon realizing he is alone and tries to convince himself that it is none of his business. The father on the ground whispers in agony for his daughter's name, not understanding why this happened. That scene makes Haruto remember all the suffering and humiliation he goes through every single day. He loses control and starts running after the van, cursing at himself for taking action. He dials emergency services while running, questioning what someone useless like him could even do. The kidnapper's van eventually parks at a quiet, abandoned construction site in the city. Haruto arrives out of breath and mentally gives thanks that they stopped so close by. He hears a snapping sound from inside and hides carefully so as not to be discovered by the criminals. Hibiki's accomplices take off their masks, complaining about the heat, but one of them tells the other to shut up. Seeing both their faces, Haruto confirms his suspicions about who is mastermind behind the crime. Hibiki appears saying he is going to make a phone call and orders the others to keep an eye on the little girl. Knowing the girl is inside, he decides to act before the thugs decide to move again. Haruto silently approaches the back of the van to try and do something. He picks up a large stone from the ground and breaks the vehicle's rear window with all his strength. The van's alarm goes off loudly, immediately drawing the attention of the two henchmen. Startled by the sudden noise, they decide to run out of the room to see what happened. Taking advantage of the distraction, Haruto manages to sneak into the warehouse and asks the girl to stay quiet. He finds little Rika tied up and gagged on the floor, completely helpless and crying. Haruto tries to calm Rika down and says he came there to save her from her kidnappers. He unties her ropes and asks if she can walk so they can escape right away while the criminals are distracted. The little girl cries with emotion and thanks him from the bottom of her heart for his help. Haruto is surprised and deeply touched to hear those sincere words of gratitude. Feeling something new, he pulls her close and realizes it is the first time in his life that someone actually thanked him for something. But the joy is short-lived, as Hibiki suddenly appears and intercepts him before they can leave. The bully lands a brutal punch directly to Haruto's face, knocking him down immediately. Hibiki mocks him, saying he was surprised to see that his ball rolled all the way here on its own. The henchmen start beating him mercilessly, making fun of him for trying to play the useless hero. He is tied up by the wrists and suspended, while the attackers continue hitting him with wooden planks. Feeling terrible pain and barely able to breathe, all he can do is endure the assault. Desperate from the painful torture, Haruto begins to cry and silently beg for help. The bully laughs mockingly and warns that nobody is coming to save him, calling him a mere punching bag, even completely battered. He gives a sad smile for having managed to buy enough time for the girl. Suddenly, a mysterious and imposing man in a gray suit arrives, praising Hibiki's work. Hibiki greets the mobster respectfully and says he was just following orders quickly. The mobster evaluates the girl and explains that children who awaken blades are valuable for brainwashing. He adds that they can also sell her for a high price due to her spiritual energy. Next, the man notices Haruto hanging there and asks with disdain what that means. Hibiki excuses himself, saying the boy saw everything, but the boss complains and says he should have ended him right away. Hibiki agrees with the boss and draws his flaming sword, stating it is time to clean up the mess. Seeing the imminent danger, Haruto despairs internally. Noticing the police still have not arrived, he realizes he will be eliminated and that they will take the girl away if he does nothing to fight back. With all the fury he has left, Haruto screams, ordering the criminals to let the girl go. Without listening, Hibiki coldly states that balls should not talk and thrusts his sword into him. Haruto feels the blade piercing his chest and blood begins to pour from his injured body. Nearly out of strength, he deeply regrets being unable to fulfill his desire to save the girl. However, in his unconscious mind, a giant pair of purple eyes suddenly appears. Suddenly, he wakes up lying on the ground of a strange place filled with embedded swords, completely confused. Haruto stands up and tries to understand how he ended up there after being stabbed in reality. He runs his hands over his chest and is extremely shocked to realize he has no wound. A mysterious voice explains that this place is his mental world, where physical wounds do not exist. The creature says he was only able to enter there because he was so close to his inevitable end in real life. The mysterious voice says it is right in front of him, revealing a colossal and terrifying creature. Haruto takes a step back in total panic, unable to believe the size of that monster. The being introduces itself as Magatsukami, the god of calamity who was also rejected by other gods. The youth becomes thoughtful, trying to connect that bizarre appearance with the benevolent gods of legends. The god of calamity proposes a deal to Haruto, promising to grant any wish he wants. However, he warns that in exchange, the boy will need to sacrifice absolutely everything for his goal. Confused and scared by that terrible proposal, Haruto asks what he really means by that. The being warns that if he refuses the offer, he will simply pass away and rot in real life. He presses him to offer his life as payment and to make a wish worthy of that moment. Haruto feels his sinister aura, but is absolutely certain that this being can truly help him. He thinks about asking to save the girl, but quickly realizes that would not be enough for the future. He changes his mind upon remembering his own powerlessness and realizes what he truly desires. He screams with all his soul, asking for enough power to save anyone he wants from now on. The god of calamity is surprised to see that the boy wants to give his own life just to save others. Haruto responds no with great firmness, leaving the being even more intrigued by his courageous attitude. He confesses that his life before was like being empty, just wandering around without any true purpose. However, everything changed when that little girl finally trusted him and thanked him from the bottom of her heart. That sincere thank you was the only moment he actually felt alive in his entire existence. If he can feel that again, he will gladly hand over his life to the divine entity in exchange for that power he demands from the god of calamity, the ultimate power to slash through and destroy any obstacle in his path. The creature smiles, saying that wish is incredible and that his ego is worthy of a true god. It then invokes its 10 great ultimate and destructive powers to begin the boy's transformation, and it decides to grant him the powerful claws of the god of calamity for him to use in battle. The being tells him to use this immense power obtained in exchange for his own life however he pleases. Back in reality, the criminals prepare to leave, carrying the kidnapped girl. Suddenly, all of them are paralyzed by a terrifying and unexplainable sensation that arises in the air. In the sky, the moon turns completely red, signaling the start of an extraordinary new divine revelation. This is the phenomenon that occurs when gods grant powers to humans, completely altering the world around them. This magical and spectacular anomaly is capable of affecting reality in an unbelievable way. Generally, people who witness this divine event feel immense joy and are filled with wonder. However, this new revelation from Haruto begins to emerge in a much darker and more terrifying manner. The surrounding atmosphere shifts drastically, scaring even those who are far away. Hibiki and his henchmen fall into total panic, unable to comprehend what is happening with the red sky. In the middle of the red mist, Haruto emerges transformed with white hair, holding a sinister sword. With a deadly glare, he coldly orders them to take their hands off the kidnapped girl. The criminals are terrified, unable to believe that the boy they just stabbed is standing up and alive. Haruto tightly holds his new blade, which glows with dark and devastating energy. Hibiki is in complete shock upon realizing that the former failure has now awakened a manifestation blade. The mobster orders Hibiki to stop trembling and commands the quick elimination of Haruto to remove the witness. Haruto takes a firm combat stance and repeats the warning for them to release the girl immediately. Hibiki moves forward annoyed with his fire sword, saying that rookies who gain divine weapons always think they are invincible. He delivers a top-down strike, telling Haruto to regret his foolishness in the underworld. With great calm and lightning-fast reflexes, Haruto simply watches the incoming attack approach him. He blocks Hibiki's flaming strike with extreme ease, clashing the two blades with force. To Hibiki's absolute despair, his sword is sliced in half without him even understanding what happened. Following the block, Haruto makes a swift movement and delivers an overwhelming sword strike into the air. The force of the slash is so absurd that it breaks the structure of the area and terrifies the mobster. The attack destroys the ground and opens a gigantic crater across the entire abandoned construction site under that terrifying blood moon. The weak boy finally managed to obtain ultimate power. The one who was ignored and treated like a nobody finally managed to change his cruel destiny. He finally obtained the perfect sword to cut through all his ties with the past. In another part of the city, the assistant desperately calls the emperor to report the colossal anomaly that appeared. Emperor Kaname calmly observes the red sky while asking the stall chef for more noodles. The assistant screams through the phone. Extremely irritated that he is eating peacefully at such a critical moment, Kaname asks for calm and says there are priorities in life, while the other complains that eating ramen should not be one right now. He thanks the cook for the delicious meal and starts walking toward the location of the event. He thinks to himself that no matter the type of revelation, whoever wields the blade is always guided by their own ego. The emperor smiles mockingly, knowing that judging whether this ego is good or bad is his true mission. The mysterious and immense dark energy of Haruto's revelation continues to cover the sky of that entire region. City residents look up and comment in fear about that bizarre phenomenon in the sky. The anomaly changes the world and proves that it is always the deepest human desire that guides the awakened blade. The Sword Emperor prepares to decide whether this mysterious new force will be used for good or evil. Back at the combat site, absolute silence takes over the entire abandoned construction area. Haruto holds Rika relieved, while the small purple spirit explains that she merely passed out due to his power's presence. He smiles happily for saving her, and the small spirit mocks him, saying he looks more relieved than the actual victim. Looking around at all the defeated enemies passed out on the ground, Haruto can barely believe the strength he used. The spirit warns that it fulfilled its promise to give power, and that now it is Haruto's turn to help it achieve its mysterious goal. The small spirit begins to state that its grand goal is to accomplish something very important to it. Haruto tries to listen to what it is saying, but says its voice is too faint and the connection must be bad. The god warns that the boy needs to learn how to draw out the true hidden power of his new blade. The boy is left confused about what it meant by true power, while the creature's signal fades away. He regrets it, knowing it is useless to try invoking a power he does not even know how to control properly. While thinking about what to do, he notices that the leader of the kidnappers is taking the chance to sneak away. The mobster runs terrified, remembering Haruto's devastating strike that was vastly superior to Hibiki's. He decides he will no longer get involved in any of this and tries to escape the location as fast as possible. However, the Sword Emperor himself appears in his path, looking very calmly at his phone. Kaname shows the criminal's wanted poster on the screen and calls him trash after reading his long criminal record. Desperate, the criminal attacks, trying to strike the Emperor to make an escape there. The Emperor easily dodges the mobster's strike and remarks that he has already understood the entire crime situation. From afar, Haruto watches the scene, extremely shocked by the surreal speed of that mysterious man. The Emperor easily defeats the mobster and mockingly warns that doing bad things is prohibited by law. He wonders if what he saw was just an illusion of his mind, or if the man really is that powerful. Kaname approaches Haruto in a friendly manner and asks if he was the one who caused all that destruction at the site. He smiles in a friendly way and displays his official license. Saying he is just a passing demon hunter, he praises the incredible shockwave left by Haruto's destructive slash on the construction site floor. However, he notes that the previous attack only threw Hibiki far away without leaving any serious wound on his body. Haruto continues holding his blade, which still emanates a terrifying and dense purple aura around him. The Emperor is greatly impressed by the fact that a beginner already possesses a weapon with such destructive power. He notices the sinister spiritual energy leaking from the sword after that cataclysmic revelation earlier with great seriousness. Kaname states that there appears to be a malevolent god dwelling inside that mysterious sword. Haruto is left speechless and very worried that he discovered the presence of the entity in his mind. The small purple spirit appears comically, admitting that it cannot deny his accusation in any way. Facing this, the Emperor keeps his smile and calmly warns that he will need to break his sword. Haruto goes into immediate shock, unable to believe what he just heard from the experienced hunter. Without wasting time, Kaname lunges with full force, and Haruto blocks the swift blow with great difficulty. The colossal impact between the two swords generates a massive shockwave that breaks the surrounding concrete walls. Haruto is pushed back by the force of the impact and complains angrily that he almost passed away from that sudden attack. Kaname walks calmly and explains that a hunter's duty is to protect peace and security throughout the world. Haruto tries to catch his breath while the Emperor watches him with complete calm and seriousness in his gaze. He praises the boy for managing to hold the weapon firmly without letting it break on his very first attack. He warns that clinging to this kind of dark power is bad, but assures that he has no intention of hurting him. Haruto wonders if his new weapon really is that dangerous to be considered a major threat by the hunter. He remembers the serious deal he made with the spirit and offering his own life in exchange for that power. The hunter commands him to hand over the sword peacefully, but Haruto screams, refusing to accept his request. Kaname regrets the refusal and says that, in that case, he will have no choice but to fulfill his duty through combat. Haruto trembles nervously while holding the sword hilt, knowing full well the overwhelming strength of his opponent. The Emperor charges at high speed with a precise slash, while Haruto screams, refusing to let go of his weapon. The two swords collide again in a brutal clash, shooting bright sparks into the construction site air. Kaname begins moving unbelievably fast, delivering consecutive and precise strikes at the boy. Haruto grinds his teeth and exerts maximum effort to block that extremely fast sequence. He can barely see the trajectory of the Emperor's attacks, which seem to come from every possible direction. The impact of the swift attacks tears through the ground and destroys parts of the scenery with great ease. The youth dodges a vertical cut by a hair's breadth that almost hits him dead on, scaring him immensely. A bright golden light follows the precise trajectory of all the fast movements of the sword. Emperor Kaname casually remarks that Haruto's survival instincts are not bad at all for a beginner. Out of breath, Haruto realizes his opponent is getting faster and faster, and that he himself has reached his limit. Kaname says he understands the feeling of clinging to that power, but warns that it definitely does not suit him. One of the Emperor's swift slashes lightly grazes Haruto's cheek, making him bleed a little. The hunter stares at him seriously and asks what he truly wants to achieve by using this dark power. Haruto answers that he wants to help people, but Kaname finds that too admirable and says he does not trust such a simple answer. With his eyes glowing red, the boy screams furiously, assuring that he is being completely honest in his words. He repeats that being able to save that helpless little girl made him feel truly alive for the first time. Kaname counters, saying that he merely became temporarily intoxicated by the blade's power upon helping someone. He asks whether ending someone for the first time would not also bring a false and dangerous sense of pleasure and accomplishment. The Emperor warns him that he runs the serious risk of becoming a prisoner to this power and attacking people endlessly. Even facing warnings and danger, Haruto refuses to back down and firmly prepares for the next attack. A new thunderous impact occurs between the two, destroying part of the ceiling and kicking up dust across the scene. The hunter states that he does not need power to do good deeds and calmly asks if that should not be enough for him. Haruto breathes very heavily, completely exhausted and battered due to the frantic pace of that fight. Kaname notices that the last attack was not that of an amateur and thinks about how dangerous the boy's path could be from here on. He mentally concludes that the youth could become the salvation or the destruction of the world, being a true double-edged sword. To prevent the boy from suffering even more physically, Kaname decides it is time to quickly end that uneven confrontation. He delivers a brilliant top-down sword blow, releasing an overwhelming golden power in Haruto's direction. Haruto feels an absurd spiritual pressure and freezes in utter terror at such force coming from the hunter. He begins trembling uncontrollably, feeling firsthand that this sensation of pressure is far worse than his own moment of defeat. The hunter warns him that he will perish if he takes the blow head-on and tells him to drop the sword if he wants to stay alive. The boy hesitates for a second, but knows very well that without that weapon, he will never be able to save the people he wants to protect. He screams with all his remaining strength, saying it would be a huge waste to give up on everything. Now the Sword Emperor is quite surprised to hear that and merely repeats the word with an intrigued look at the boy. He gives a slight smirk upon realizing the youth's immense determination, even when facing destruction head-on. Kaname says he can hate him if he wants, and takes the blame for failing to convince him through words alone. The two clash again in an extremely violent explosion of golden and purple energy in the center of the warehouse. A massive detonation occurs in the abandoned construction area, destroying all the concrete floor and kicking up thick dust. The god of calamity warns in his mind not to get disheartened and to remember well the deal they sealed earlier. The divine being explains that this special sword has the unique power to cut through absolutely anything he decides he wants to cut. It says the blade becomes infinitely sharper as he pours his own spiritual energy into it. Haruto lets out a deafening scream of fury and pain as he tries with all his strength to resist the opponent's attack. A huge shockwave knocks Konami back, pushing him away by the impressive energy released by the boy. A piece of broken blade flies high through the air. While Haruto promises in his mind to cut down any obstacle in his path, he lands with great difficulty on the destroyed ground and realizes something went very wrong at the end of that direct confrontation. The boy falls to his knees on the ground, feeling unbearable pain all over his body, and groans in deep exhaustion. He looks at his own hand and panics upon noticing that his precious sword broke right in the middle of the fight. Konami slowly approaches him and looks down with a serious and extremely imposing gaze. He remarks in surprise that, even with the sword completely broken, the boy still refuses to let go of it. The hunter decides to sheath his blade and says he can finally believe in the purity and truth of his heart. Haruto, still lying on the floor, is completely unable to understand anything and lets out a sound of utter confusion at that attitude. He explains that he changed his mind about breaking the weapon and begins using magic to heal the boy's injured arm. The youth asks why he changed his mind so suddenly, and Konami says hunters usually communicate through their battles. The emperor states that he felt the truth in the clash of their swords and saw that his desire to save people is completely real. He says there is no longer any reason to confiscate the weapon if he keeps that strong determination inside himself. Haruto panics and begins apologizing desperately for breaking the experienced hunter's precious sword. Konami calmly tells him not to worry, while the boy insists that a weapon was like a hunter's very life. He laughs and casually reveals that the broken sword was just a worthless replica from his personal collection. Konami changes the subject and seriously warns that other hunters will not believe him as easily as he did. He says that first Haruto will need to train hard to learn how to control and master that dark blade properly. The emperor offers his help to begin training and reveals he knows the perfect place for the boy to start this new journey. To begin, Konami says he will recommend Haruto for the entrance exam of a certain academy. Haruto is left completely clueless and reacts in surprise to that sudden proposal. The hunter explains that he must enter the famous Togoku Academy, known as the gateway for those who want to hunt demons. He states that Haruto's main goal inside that institution will be to become an official demon hunter. Konami reinforces that the prestigious Togoku Academy is the main path for anyone wishing to become a real hunter. Therefore, he insists that he wants to see the boy studying there and training hard to reach that goal. Just 2 days pass, and the big evaluation day at the gates of the renowned institution finally arrives. Shortly before that, Konami had handed a handwritten recommendation letter to Haruto to take with him to the exam. Upon arriving at the location, the boy looks at the letter in his hands and can barely believe he actually went there. Togoku National Academy is famous for being the best school for demon hunters, where the greatest warriors graduated. Observing the huge crowd around him, Haruto wonders if all those people are also going to take the exam. He notes dismally that absolutely all the other candidates there possess their own manifestation blade. The youth looks down and remembers the power of his own blade glowing intensely in his hands. He knows he needs to figure out a way to draw out the true value and power of his own sword. Haruto reflects that the entity sealed in his weapon has not spoken to him since the Pact, but hopes to change that. If he enters the academy, he holds the hilt of the sword and silently wonders if they will be able to talk again someday. With a determined look, the boy reaffirms to himself his grand promise to use that weapon to save people. Feeling that he has finally found a purpose for his life, he decides to give absolutely everything he has on this test. Suddenly, Konami appears behind him and pats his shoulder, scaring the boy so much he almost jumps out of his skin. The hunter strikes a stylish pose and says the youth can simply call him by the name Akuta from now on. Haruto thanks him for the recommendation, but worries and confesses that he still has not received any explanation on how the test works. Akuta realizes he completely forgot to explain, leaving the boy quite doubtful about whether that man is actually trustworthy. The mentor raises 3 fingers to show that the selection process consists of a total of 3 different exams. He explains that each test is worth 100 points, and that candidate approval will depend on a combined total of 300 points. The youth says he never learned anything about blades or combat, but Akuta assures him that the important thing is having the courage to crush the test. The hunter gives an excited thumbs up, trusting in his success, leaving Haruto even more apprehensive about his mentor's attitude. An announcement over the loudspeaker warns that the first exam will begin shortly and asks everyone to head to the testing area. Akuda warns that the first stage is just a written test of general knowledge and tells the boy not to worry. Needlessly, he smiles and says he is anxious to see what kind of path the youth will manage to forge using his peculiar sword. Haruto responds respectfully and takes leave of his mentor to head toward the location of the first evaluation. Although feeling huge nervousness, the boy tries to calm down, remembering that a real hunter guaranteed he would be fine. Upon spotting the sign indicating the room for the first exam, he takes a deep breath and mentally promises to give his best sitting at his desk. Haruto thinks that, even without spiritual energy, he was always very good at school studies. But upon receiving the test and looking at the complex questions, the boy's eyes widen in a complete state of shock. The youth panics upon realizing he understands nothing of that content, while the start of the exam is officially announced. The first question requires him to explain escape techniques using earth manipulation based on complex elemental synergies. Facing so many absurd questions about rituals and deities, Haruto begins to cry and scream mentally in pure desperation. Outside, Akuda eats peacefully and thinks that anyone with the basics could score a decent grade on that test. After the evaluation ends, the other students comment in the courtyard about the high scores they managed to get on the written test. Haruto sits totally depressed in the corner, desperately lamenting that he was unable to answer a single question. At that moment, a guy with a goatee approaches the boy and rudely asks if he is that Kamakiri guy. He points his finger in Haruto's face and aggressively questions what someone like him is doing at Togoku Academy. The guy grumbles in annoyance, stating that the youth only knows how to cause trouble and headaches everywhere he goes. Haruto timidly tries to explain that a real demon hunter was the one who wrote his recommendation letter. The bully does not believe a word and aggressively demands to see the boy's exam registration slip. The youth begins remembering all the traumas and abuse from his past, feeling his body freeze completely in pure terror. The attacker confiscates Haruto's document and confesses in surprise that the exam slip appears to be totally legitimate. However, looking closer at the paper, he comes across the terrible score the boy received on the evaluation. The bully shouts in shock upon seeing that he scored only 2 points and questions if the boy has no sense of his proper place in the world. The other candidates around begin gossiping and laughing at Haruto, recognizing the boy as the one abandoned by God. The arrogant guy tears up Haruto's registration slip and says that uneducated trash without spiritual energy should just leave. He throws the pieces of paper into the air and states that seeing someone like Haruto taking the test is an insult to all hunters. Next, the attacker calls his friends to leave and focus on what really matters. As the pieces of paper fall, Haruto remembers the vote of confidence and Akuda's smile regarding his future. Not knowing what to do, the boy falls to his knees on the ground and looks desolate at his completely destroyed registration slip. A short time later, the candidates are gathered in a massive sports arena for the start of the second phase of the exam. An announcement over the sound system warns that this second stage will focus on evaluating the aptitude of the manifestation blade. The voice explains that candidates will be divided by specialties, starting with destruction types, focused on direct combat. Next, support types are presented, who use their special abilities to strengthen and help their allies. Finally, healing types are shown, who use their spiritual energy to treat injuries and regenerate warriors. The loudspeaker then directs everyone to head to the booth, best suited to demonstrate the specific powers of their weapons. In the destruction sector, a pink-haired examiner welcomes them and explains that this is the division that fights on the front lines. She warns about the heavy responsibilities of the area and says the practical test consists of landing a very powerful hit on a statue. The examiner warns that the stone monument is as durable as an intermediate demon and that they must give it their all, leaving everyone in the audience quite tense. She tells them to take a step forward and attack whenever they are ready. The first candidate steps up confidently and charges at the target, delivering a slash charged with greenish energy. However, the attack is repelled by the absurd durability of the monument, and the youth ends up thrown backward by the impact. The other participants watch the scene shocked, wondering if the hide of an intermediate monster really is harder than steel. The examiner explains that leaving even a scratch is a good result, and awards 50 points to the boy before calling the next one. The candidate named Sato lets out a battle cry and channels a powerful charge of yellow lightning directly into his sword. With a swift movement, he lands a devastating strike on the stone statue, releasing electrical sparks throughout the area. Satisfied with the performance and strength demonstrated by the youth, the examiner evaluates his attack and grants him 65 points. Sato's friend runs toward him to congratulate him. Proud that he showed the strength of their school's star player, Sato displays a smug smile and boasts about using electricity to cut the monument, showing off his superior skills right after. A blue-haired youth steps forward calmly and completely destroys the stone monster with just a single sword strike. The pink-haired examiner observes this totally impressed and softly praises the boy's magnificent performance. The scoreboard announces the total destruction of the target and a perfect score of 100 points, leaving Sato and his friend wide-eyed with envy. The surrounding crowd begins whispering in astonishment, commenting that the mysterious boy is on a completely different level from everyone there. The blue-haired youth cleans his weapon with precision and slowly sheathes it back with great elegance. He remains standing in the center of the arena in absolute silence, drawing looks of admiration and respect from everyone present with a cold gaze. The youth tells the entire crowd to shut up and focus only on their own weapons. The examiner is shocked to see that he controlled the whole mood of the place just by sheathing his sword, feeling sorry for whoever goes next. The prodigy boy begins to exit the field, leaving behind an extremely tense and heavy atmosphere that no one can break. From high up in the stadium stands, some important figures of the organization attentively observe the progress of the evaluation. Akuta recognizes the talented boy as the second son of the prestigious Ryudoji family and admits that his talent lives up to the family name. The evaluator beside him agrees and says he will certainly take first place, relieved that they are maintaining the high standard of new students. Akuta gives an enigmatic smile behind his sunglasses and questions the meaning of that alleged quality of the students. The man asks if there is some hidden irony there, but the hunter laughs it off and says he just wants to evaluate everyone fairly. On the field, the Ryudoji family prodigy walks along bored, thinking that the standard of the legendary academy has dropped so much it is ridiculous. Suddenly, he ends up bumping head-on into Haruto, who lets out a groan of pain as he hits his chest hard. The MC quickly bows, apologizing 1,000 times, and flusteredly explains that he ended up being a bit late. The prodigy boy turns away with disdain and lets out a sound of doubt while Haruto looks confused at the silence that overtook the arena. He timidly asks if the test has already ended, and the other youth simply ignores the question and continues on his way in silence. The examiner announces that she is going to wrap up the event, but Haruto hurriedly raises his hand and shouts that he is candidate number 1042. The Ryudoji family youth mutters, annoyed by the arrival of that clumsy latecomer, thinking the test standard is far too low. But suddenly, the prodigy notices that his own manifestation blade begins to tremble and react to that goofy boy's presence. Without noticing any of this, Haruto ends up tripping over his own feet and takes a spectacular fall onto the grass right in front of the examiner. The blue-haired boy watches the scene incredulously, refusing to believe his precious divine weapon reacted to someone so clumsy. Haruto quickly stands up and holds out his registration slip all patched together with tape, begging to be evaluated as well. The crumpled document reveals Haruto's details and his terrible score of only 2 points obtained on the difficult written test earlier. The examiner sighs a bit and tells the boy to step forward and attack whenever he is ready. Sato and his partner mock Haruto behind his back, doubting he can do anything without having any spiritual energy. Facing the huge stone monster, the MC takes a deep breath and begins to concentrate to summon his divine weapon. He remembers all the insults he has heard in his life and thinks that maybe people were right to doubt him in the past. But even so, Haruto raises his sword and releases an absurd amount of reddish energy, scaring everyone in the arena. The examiner and officials in the stands widen their eyes in complete shock upon feeling the pressure of that sudden power. With a fierce look, the youth delivers an absurdly fast and sharp strike toward the huge stone monument far away. An assistant on the phone congratulates the blue-haired prodigy on his perfect result and mentions a curious rumor. He tells the youth that there is a candidate in the exam recommended personally by the Sword Emperor and reveals the boy's name at that exact instant. The statue Haruto attacked splits perfectly in half at the revelation of Haruto Kamikiri's name. The blue-haired youth watches the split statue and notes that the slash was raw, proving the boy has no control over his strength. Even so, he realizes that it was precisely this lack of refinement that made his own weapon react so intensely. Haruto complains of pain while holding his own face. While the prodigy finally confirms who was responsible for that feat, the surrounding crowd begins to whisper in absolute shock upon seeing the out-of-breath boy standing before the completely destroyed target. Unable to believe it, the pink-haired examiner announces that it was total destruction and awards the maximum score of 100 points. Haruto remembers his promise to keep moving forward and fight for the goal he finally chose for his own life. with a determined look. He swears he will not let insults stop him, bringing his overall score to 102 points. The force of the strike leaves a massive fissure in the arena floor, showing that a new rough diamond has just emerged in the institution. The scene changes to the examiner's room, where officials discuss the shocking performance they just witnessed. Several experienced examiners analyze video recordings of Haruto's fights and those of other standout competitors on the screens. One of them points to Haruto's screen and remarks that this year's new talent is truly someone very intriguing and unusual. Akuta, sitting comfortably in an armchair, agrees with a smile on his face and says he really found a true gem. However, the blonde examiner named Kusabi crosses his arms seriously and says he cannot agree with that statement. Kusabi questions if the Sword Emperor failed to notice the dark and sinister aura residing inside that young candidate's blade. He firmly states that the boy Akuta brought to the exam is nothing more than a dangerous seed for future trouble. Akuta expected Kusabi to keep an eye on the youth, but the man counters, saying the boy will fail before that is even necessary. The world's strongest hunter displays a smirk and proposes a bet to his companion, leaving him quite surprised. He bets that Haruto will take first place in the next test and says Kusabi will have to train the boy if he loses the bet. The blonde man looks at the hunter suspiciously and asks what he will receive if he wins the proposed challenge. Akuta promises to grant any wish within his power as the Great Sword Emperor should he end up losing facing such a valuable and tempting proposal. Kusabi accepts the challenge with arms crossed and a very focused look. He reflects that the third stage of the exam will be the hardest evaluation of all, as it will test the true essence of a hunter. Kusabi decides to observe the test closely to see with his own eyes if the youth really possesses all that alleged potential. In a huge, dark, and cramped room, candidates begin whispering in confusion about the location chosen for the third test. Haruto stands firm in the crowd and decides to make up for his low written test score, knowing he needs to pass no matter what. A bearded man in a suit appears at the scene ringing a golden bell to call the attention of all participants present. He asks for absolute silence and officially announces that the third and final stage of the entrance exam will begin at that moment. The man reveals that their task will be a demon hunt lasting 3 hours, where they must defeat as many monsters as they can. He explains that the test will take place in a demon preservation area belonging to the Hunter Academy itself. The official reveals that the test's massive forest attracts a large amount of miasma from surrounding magical energy lines. He adds that the area is controlled so that low-level and intermediate-level demons constantly appear in their path. Haruto swallows hard and gets quite worried upon hearing that intermediate-level monsters will also be loose in the forest. The man asks if everyone received their identification tags at the entrance and warns about the rules for forfeiting the test. He explains that the tag will activate a forced return spell to the medical ward if the candidate is defeated in combat. The instructor warns that anyone needing to use the rescue spell will receive a score of 0 and says the other rules are on the back of the object. He emphasizes that knowing how to avoid deadly dangers is also an essential and mandatory quality for any demon hunter. The instructor wraps up the explanation and tells everyone to show their potential, while Haruto prepares to go all out from the start. However, the rules for starting the test end up changing a very important detail before the iron gates open for good. The man warns that releasing everyone at once would cause chaos and decides to start only with those who have 191 points or higher. With that, the strongest warriors in the class step forward proudly to officially begin the grueling third exam. The first group to start the test is led by the prodigy Toya Ryudoji, who secured first place overall with an impressive 198 points. The instructor announces that the next group will start in 5 minutes, making Haruto realize his low score left him for last, and at a disadvantage 45 minutes pass, and the boy continues waiting anxiously for his turn to enter the dangerous testing forest. The examiner at the gate tells Haruto not to put too much pressure on himself and just give his best, and the boy thanks him politely. As soon as the start for the last group is announced, the protagonist lets out a shout of determination and runs with all his strength into the forest. The instructor watches Haruto leave and finds it unbelievable that someone with such a low score in the first phase of the exam is actually trying to continue Haruto runs through the trees, thinking that monsters near the entrance must have already been hunted and that he needs to go deeper into the forest. As he leaps through the branches, the boy realizes with surprise that his body feels extremely light and agile, as if he were on a whole new level. He remembers that during the combat against Akuta, his body was also able to perform fast movements he never could have imagined. Haruto realizes that this great, mysterious power has been surging from within him since the moment he received his manifestation blade. The youth realizes he is finally managing to manifest true spiritual energy and physical reinforcement through his body. He gets extremely excited and thrilled upon noticing the ease with which he can jump incredibly high from one place to another. Haruto smiles upon realizing he is finally experiencing the world in the same way other demon hunters always saw it. Suddenly, the boy grows serious and focuses his attention as he senses a hostile presence quickly approaching through the trees. A wolf demon leaps from the shadows of the plants to attack him by surprise, making the boy regret lowering his guard. Haruto blocks the monster's sharp fangs in time and thinks about the terrible damage he would have suffered had he taken that impact head-on. However, upon pushing the creature back, the youth notices something strange and gets confused by how easy the block was. He steps back and realizes the monster's charge was much lighter than he expected, remembering that it is just a weak demon. Haruto realizes that the strength of that attack is nothing compared to the devastating strike he faced in his fight against Akuta. With a fast and precise movement in the air, the protagonist spins his body and slices the wolf demon in half without any difficulty. He displays a wild smile and tells himself with total confidence that facing enemies of that level will be no problem at all. Seeing the monster defeated on the ground, Haruto celebrates being able to fight for real and decides to keep the momentum to hunt more opponents. In another part of the forest, a young hunter faces several monkey-like creatures and complains that there are more and more enemies there. His short-haired companion tells him to stop complaining and focus on attacking at the same rhythm as her so they can control the situation. The girl shouts at the classmate with glasses to provide decent support, reminding her that they let her join their group for that reason. The young girl with glasses timidly agrees and begins concentrating her green support magic around her manifestation blade. With the buff active, the short-haired girl leaps with full force to deliver a fatal strike against one of the monsters. Several rocks begin floating around the creatures, while an earth entrapment technique is activated in the middle of combat. One of the monsters manages to escape the trap, but the other youth in the group acts fast and eliminates it with a slicing fire technique. The guy remarks that the enemies are weak, and the girl gets excited, thinking that good cooperation could take them to the top of the rankings. However, in the blink of an eye, the guy's arm is brutally sliced off by an invisible attack surging from among the trees. The youth looks at his severed limb in complete panic and despair, while his identification tag begins to glow. The forced return spell is activated instantly, and the guy vanishes from the forest in a beam of bluish light. The short-haired girl stands in shock at the sudden disappearance of her ally, and the girl with glasses suspects an intermediate demon is nearby. A fast monster moves through the bushes, and the girl tries to defend herself, frantically searching for where the next strike will come from. Suddenly, the creature surges from above and hits the girl with a devastating attack that hurls her violently against the forest floor. The girl lets out an unbearable scream of pain upon taking a direct hit from the sharp claws of the powerful intermediate demon, unable to continue fighting. Her tag glows intensely and activates the teleportation magic to remove her from there. The girl with glasses is left completely alone, facing danger and panics over being unable to even match the monster's speed. She begins to cry in terror upon seeing the intermediate demon appear right in front of her, ready to be attacked without any chance of defense. However, Haruto comes dropping from the sky like lightning and delivers an extremely powerful slash that rips off the monster's arm all at once. The boy lands firmly on the ground while the defeated demon's body falls heavy and lifeless right behind him. The girl with glasses watches the scene completely speechless and lets out a sound of surprise at the protagonist's unbelievable intervention. She silently wonders who that mysterious warrior could be. Having managed to defeat a monster of that level so easily, Haruto turns calmly to look at her, making the girl wonder in awe if he might be the famous Ryudoji family prodigy. However, the boy begins apologizing excessively and asks if he ended up stealing her prey, thinking she had everything under control. Seeing the boy's goofy behavior, the girl discards her theory and thanks him relieved. Confessing she was indeed in grave danger, Haruto immediately drops to his knees on the ground and touches his forehead to the dirt in a gesture of deep respect and formal apology. He lifts his head with a big, bright smile and says, "She is very welcome," leaving the girl completely confused. Next, the youth happily leaps away, wishing her good luck on the exam, leaving the girl behind still quite intrigued. Haruto celebrates enthusiastically as he leaps through the trees. Feeling extremely happy and alive for having managed to help another person, the boy realizes that heading toward the sounds of battle is the best way to find monsters, and at the same time, save other candidates. Spotting another confrontation in the distance, he decides to move quickly to offer his help to those in need. Haruto begins jumping from one fight to another, defeating various monsters and ensuring the safety of several other competitors. Countless youths thank him sincerely, praising his helpful attitude and saying he truly saved their lives. Hearing so many genuine compliments and thanks, the boy feels a strong and wonderful beat in his chest, finding it incredible. He notes he still has not crossed paths with any intermediate-type demon and begins thinking today is his big lucky day. Either way, he decides he will run away without thinking twice if he comes across any absurd danger ahead. At that moment, Haruto reaches a clearing and spots Toya Ryudoji surrounded by a gigantic horde of terrible wild monsters. He watches from a high branch and worries about the dangerous situation, immediately offering to help his classmate in combat. The MC extends his hand to help Toya, intending to fight alongside him against all those threats in the forest. However, the blue-haired prodigy casts an icy glare at him and tells the boy to get out of his way once and for all. Toya releases a devastating blue dragon technique that eliminates absolutely every monster around in the blink of an eye. Haruto is blown back violently by the brutal shockwave of the attack and tries to shield himself from the overwhelming gale. The blue-haired prodigy sheathes his sword and disdainfully notes that the protagonist managed to come out unscathed from that massive explosion. He walks slowly toward the boy and asks if he is that Haruto Kamakiri everyone has been talking about. Haruto gets confused and asks how he knows his name, deducing it might be because of the previous aptitude phase of the test. Suddenly, the rival charges forward, delivering a powerful slash with his sword, forcing the protagonist to defend himself hurriedly with his weapon. Struggling to handle the pressure of the surprise strike, Haruto annoyed questions why he is attacking out of nowhere in the middle of the exam. Toya stares at him with intense fury and seriously states that he refuses to accept the situation the way it is unfolding. The prodigy demands that he prove the strength that earned him the personal recommendation and approval of the legendary Sword Emperor. With a gaze filled with determination and rivalry, Toya insists he wants to see the boy's real power with his own eyes. Haruto asks him to stop and argues that candidates should not be fighting among themselves while they need to hunt demons on the test. Toya repeats the word with deep disdain and applies even more force to their sword clash to subdue the opponent. Once and for all, he arrogantly states that a mere entrance exam is something totally trivial and of no importance to his goals. The blue-haired youth suddenly leaps backward to gain distance and prepare a new sequence of fast attacks. However, Toya realizes in shock that he retreated unconsciously due to sensing a dark and terrifying presence coming from Haruto. On the other side, the protagonist lowers his head with a very serious expression and repeats the word trivial in a visibly hurt tone. He remembers that this test was the first time someone actually acknowledged him in life and showed him a real path to follow. Looking directly at his adversary, Haruto firmly states that the test might be insignificant to the prodigy. He bared his teeth with a reddish gaze of pure fury and shouts that this test indeed holds gigantic importance for him. Recalling his promise to use his blade to save people, the boy channels all his determination to face his adversary. In the observation room, Akuta laughs amusedly and comments to Kusabi that Haruto is fascinating for wanting to save others out of pure personal egoism. Kusabi watches the start of the confrontation between the two promising youths on the screens and notes that rivalries have already begun emerging this year. The pink-haired examiner sighs, commenting that there are always a few problematic students who decide to fight each other during the test. Another official in the room ponders that, despite everything, this year's batch of new talent is truly exceptional and promising. However, she reminds them that intermediate demons are obstacles to be avoided and fears for the worst if the fights continue like this. Akuta suggests with a smirk that they should start preparing in case they need to intervene directly in the exam. Back in combat, Toya focuses on the fight and thinks that the noise caused by their direct confrontation could easily attract worse monsters. Determined to defend his point of view, Haruto leaps furiously, raising his sword to deliver a powerful blow against his rival. Toya manages to block the frontal attack in time, but ends up pushed backward by the tremendous physical force released by the boy. Feeling the impact of the block, the prodigy complains of pain and stands surprised by the adversary's heavy and aggressive counterattack. Haruto breaks into a cold sweat upon noticing Toya's speed is absurd, resembling the extreme combat he waged against the Sword Emperor. The blue-haired youth realizes Haruto's style is completely amateur, but is impressed to see that he survives purely on reflexes. Toya positions himself again to attack seriously and firmly states that this amateur strength cannot be all he has. He stares at the protagonist with a sharp gaze and challenges him to show the full extent of his hidden divine power. Delivering a strike charged with blue energy, Toya demands to see everything Haruto is hiding inside himself to prove he deserves the recommendation. Haruto is thrown far away by the wind's impact and complains indignantly about what exactly that guy wants from him anyway. Suddenly, several intermediate demons are drawn by the battle noise and emerge from high in the trees, ready to attack the protagonist. The youth is forced to react rapidly to defend himself from the new hungry beasts charging fiercely at him. Haruto stands horrified upon seeing a gigantic, monstrous horde of demons marching rapidly in their direction. Toya calmly reveals that he personally lit a special incense to deliberately attract monsters to that location. The protagonist panics upon discovering it is his fault and insists they need to retreat immediately to survive. Toya dismisses the weak creatures as insignificant and demands to know who Haruto really is, annoyed at seeing him act so independently. The blue-haired youth focuses his fury and proudly says his full name, Toya Ryu Doji. To his adversary, Haruto defends against another blow and complains that he was not actually asking for his name, finding his rival far too dramatic. Suddenly, the ground shakes and a gigantic, terrifying creature emerges from the shadows right behind Toya, interrupting their confrontation. The powerful monster begins throwing massive dark orbs, forcing the two youths to dodge quickly to avoid being hit. Toya retreats hurriedly while cautiously observing the terrible floating creature that just appeared in the clearing. Haruto approaches him and asks if he also felt an extremely strange and uncomfortable sensation in the air. The blue-haired prodigy begins to answer, but is cut off upon sensing purple smoke and a terrifying presence behind him. Toya realizes the situation got out of hand and seriously warns that the presence of that enemy is extremely dangerous for them. He explains that when a demon is defeated, the miasma that forms its body floats in the air for a brief period of time. The youth adds that the excessive accumulation of miasma in a single place serves as perfect bait to attract much stronger monsters. Haruto finally understands and connects the miasma to that horrible, suffocating feeling he is sensing in the surrounding environment. The giant, skeletal-looking demon floats imposing before the two, emanating an extremely threatening purple energy. The creature releases a massive shockwave that pushes the youths and destroys the forest floor around them with great ease. The monster extends its skeletal hands and begins controlling the several floating orbs around it with deadly precision. Toya feels the overwhelming pressure of the enemy energy and realizes he is facing a much greater challenge than he expected to find. Haruto swallows hard, fearing that terrifying creature before them is a dreaded intermediate-type monster. The rival corrects him, shouting that this is a high-level demon, and reveals that the ones he faced before were the intermediate ones. Toya takes the blame for what happened, realizing he ended up hunting far too many intermediate monsters in a short span of time. He points his sword firmly and warns Haruto not to butt into the fight, stating that this prey belongs solely to him. The protagonist calmly accepts the warning and steps back a bit, wishing his rival good luck in a very casual manner. Toya warns that Haruto will be his next target after he defeats the creature, and the boy responds, making a funny, mocking face. The young prodigy turns to face the opponent with determination, decided to resolve all this massive mess on his own. He analyzes the dark orbs floating around the beast and tries to decipher if they will be fired as projectiles at him. Toya prepares for the worst and silently questions the speed and actual hardness of those strange attacking objects. The skeletal demon makes its move and fires the first orbs in the boy's direction with immense speed. The blue-haired youth executes his special slicing technique to aggressively deflect the incoming attack. Heading his way, he clashes his sword against the orbs and struggles to endure the absurd weight of those dark projectiles' brutal impact. Toya is pushed back by the force of the attack, but manages to jump in the air with agility to maintain his active combat stance. He realizes the objects are very hard, but believes he will be able to handle their attack at that current speed. He manages to slice the orbs, but notices in alarm that they regenerate instantly, though he decides to keep fighting through endurance. Suddenly, Haruto spots an invisible danger approaching his rival and desperately screams for him to be extremely careful. Toya is hit head-on by an invisible force mid-air and spits blood from the violence of the unexpected impact he suffered. He is thrown far away without understanding what happened, feeling terrible pain from being attacked so stealthily in the forest. The demon continues bombarding the clearing with its orbs, destroying the ground and opening huge craters with great violence. Toya stands up with difficulty and tries to comprehend the attack, realizing he felt no sound or energy coming from that invisible strike. He panics upon being surrounded by purple explosions and desperately wonders if he is under the effect of some curse or trap. Suddenly, Haruto leaps toward him and uses his sword to destroy an invisible attack that was about to hit his rival by surprise. The blades clash with empty space creates a distortion in the air, revealing the presence of another hidden projectile coming their way. The protagonist lands firmly right in front of Toya, protecting him with his defensive stance while the dust begins to settle. The young prodigy watches his ally wide-eyed, realizing in shock that the boy actually sliced an invisible orb in midair. He finally understands the monster's trick and concludes the visible orbs are just decoys, while the real threat is completely imperceptible. However, Toya grows even more intrigued and wonders how Haruto managed to react and strike something that emits no sound or spiritual energy. At that moment, the protagonist's red eyes glow intensely from behind his bangs, revealing extraordinary focus. Haruto remains motionless amid the forest's purple fog, concentrating all his senses on the surrounding environment. Thanks to his high perception, he can perfectly see two huge purple vortices, revealing the positions of the enemy's hidden attacks. This great tracking capability is a special perception skill Haruto developed on his own back when he possessed no magical energy in order to protect himself from the constant danger surrounding him. He needed to carefully observe every threat coming his way. That attentive observation eventually became his daily routine for survival. A high-level demon's attack can easily eliminate someone, and Haruto senses his own end drawing near, since he has already passed away once in the past and knows the feeling, on top of having faced and overcome peril on another memorable occasion. Passing through those extreme moments elevated his skills to a completely new level. Because of this, Haruto can now clearly perceive the approach of extreme danger. He senses the sinister presence of deadly peril coming directly toward him. The youth reacts at that exact second to avoid being caught by surprise by the attack. He swings his sword forcefully in a fast movement to slice through the air. Before him, the high-level demon floats surrounded by several dark orbs. Haruto realizes the situation is terrible, no matter how he analyzes the scenario. If the demon escapes from there, the other candidates will be in danger, so he decides to fight. He remembers, there are things that can only be saved with that blade. The guy knows very well that the decisive moment to act and fight is now. Toya shouts that a rookie shouldn't face that, but Haruto asks if he can't see the orbs. The terrifying creature continues floating amid that dense purple smoke. The rival stands shocked and questions how he can see the enemy's hidden attack. Toya admits he hadn't even noticed the orb's presence until he was hit by it. Haruto asks if the attack gets blurry as it flies toward him, leaving his rival confused. Suddenly, a loud noise announces the arrival of another group of massive monsters in the area. Toya realizes in annoyance that the smell ended up attracting yet another pack of beasts and curses. He quickly prepares to release his blue energy against the new threat. He activates his raging dragon arm and warns he will take care of the intermediate pack. The young prodigy orders Haruto to keep his eyes only on the enemy orbs. The protagonist is surprised and complains for his ally not to make decisions on his own. Toya explains there are ways to fight and asks him to watch the orbs since he can see them. He moves forward, knowing that if his partner understands the severity of the danger, he won't act foolishly. Haruto observes the enemy and realizes that merely watching the orbs will not be enough at that moment. The feared high-level demon fires a massive volley of projectiles. The youth realizes he is the only one capable of seeing and doing something to stop those attacks. He moves forward with determination and tries to strike the dark orbs coming his way. The sword doesn't cut, and he understands the weapon only cuts what he truly intends to cut. The guy exerts effort to concentrate his intent to cut in order to unleash the blade's power. The monster continues conjuring even more floating orbs around the battlefield. Haruto prepares and decides he will simply sweep away everything standing in his path. He delivers a gigantic strike of red energy that slices through the air with immense violence. However, the dust settles, and he curses upon noticing the attack did not resolve the situation. Since he only sees the orbs up close, he misses the chance to slice them and needs to get closer. He realizes they multiply very fast, and that this offensive would never end. With that, the boy asks himself if he should ignore the orbs and charge straight at the demon. He gathers momentum and decides to run at top speed, just like his rival would. The guy throws himself into the middle of the orb crossfire, dodging everything with extreme agility. He manages to find an opening in the beast's attack pattern and leaps in its direction. Haruto delivers a precise sword strike right on top of the terrible monster's head. To his utter despair, the physical strike is easily repelled by a barrier. He notices in shock that there was another invisible orb protecting the opponent's body right there. The protagonist ends up thrown far away by the force of that defensive impact. Upon hitting the ground, he lets out a gasp of surprise upon realizing something unexpected happening. He realizes the situation is terrible and that his attack won't manage to reach the demon. Toya looks back, shocked at seeing what happened, and shouts his partner's name. The protagonist remains standing, but is heavily injured and bleeding profusely from his head. He realizes the severity of his wounds and laments that extremely complicated situation. With his vision growing increasingly blurry, the boy feels he is about to lose consciousness. He feels he is falling into a void and thinks that this time he will certainly meet his end. A mysterious voice calls him pathetic for almost passing away to weaklings and stopping there again. The entity complains that he remains weak even after receiving the power of the 10 claws. Haruto complains that it didn't teach how to use the power, and the creature says he just needs to decide to cut. The boy counters, saying there's no way to cut invisible orbs that he only sees when being attacked. The creature explains this happens because he can only perceive the danger of immediate destruction. It then instructs him to focus his entire attention directly on the opponent before him. The voice tells him to start thinking about absolutely everything the enemy uses in combat, as if it were a blade created specifically with the sole goal of taking his life. Haruto's mind fills with new perceptions and ideas amid that immense darkness. He comments ironically that this seems much easier said than done. Despite complaining, the protagonist admits he has finally begun to understand its advice. The creature commands him to return immediately. As real destruction is approaching fast, the youth regains his senses back in the forest and sees himself surrounded by a heavy purple aura. He begins delivering several quick strikes with his sword to defend against the projectiles. Haruto wipes the blood from his face and breathes relieved for having survived that brutal assault. He realizes what he felt before was just the advance warning of imminent destruction. He mentalizes that he needs to concentrate even more on the presence and movements of the enemy. The guy decides not to get caught up by the orbs and focus on everything the monster fires. He begins to view every attack launched by the creature as if it were a malicious blade. Haruto concentrates to the utmost and finally manages to see the hidden threats clearly. The protagonist prepares to intercept and deflect the demon's attacks without hesitating. The boy charges forward with determination, decided to neutralize each of the enemy's assaults. He then executes his powerful 10 claws technique against the opponent's attacks. Haruto celebrates having managed to perform the slash, leaving Toya completely speechless. The protagonist collapses exhausted onto the ground, and his rival runs over to see if he's okay. He feels his body extremely heavy and notes the exhaustion is much worse than he imagined. Just then, the voice on the loudspeakers officially announces that the third exam has come to an end. The system warns that teleportation will begin and commands everyone to cease combat immediately. Toya admits he is quite surprised to see that his partner managed to survive that. As he begins to vanish through teleportation, he emphasizes that this doesn't make him strong. The protagonist mutters back that he doesn't give a single care about his rival's opinion or approval. Kusabi analyzes the data and confirms that the high-level demon was defeated by Haruto alone. He explains that whoever manages to defeat a high-level target receives the highest ranking. Akuda asks if he won the bet, but the examiner says his overall score is still in the red. The mentor counters, saying they can't fail someone who defeated a demon like that. Single-handedly, Kusabi reveals that the principal also approved Haruto and decides to keep the deal with Akuta. Akuta celebrates relieved, but the examiner warns he will eliminate the boy if he turns into a threat. Kusabi firmly states he will take responsibility for ending him if necessary. He adds that Akuta's role is precisely to guide the youth so that this doesn't occur. The examiner steps away, hoping Haruto manages to stay within safe boundaries. Sometime later, cherry blossoms cover the entrance courtyard of Togoku Academy. Haruto appears wearing the official uniform and excitedly prepares for the opening ceremony. On the auditorium stage, Toya gives his solemn speech before all the new students. The young prodigy leads the official welcome oath as a freshman at the Hunter Academy. Haruto watches Toya giving his speech and thinks his rival managed to enter as the #1 student. He reflects that, just a month ago, he never would have imagined actually being accepted into Togoku Academy. He remembers everything started upon meeting Akuta and decides to train hard to help as many people as possible. Because of this grand goal, he is totally determined to become a demon hunter. But suddenly he comes across a huge doubt and begins questioning himself quite thoughtfully. The boy simply realizes he still doesn't know what exactly a demon hunter is. Meanwhile, a strong man of very imposing appearance smirks on the auditorium stage. Haruto gets a huge fright upon realizing the mysterious man appeared on stage in the blink of an eye. The academy principal praises this year's new freshmen and says he sees limitless potential in them. He unsheathes his sword and states he is extremely excited by what he sees before him. The man floats in the air while an incredible cosmic energy spreads across the entire auditorium. The students look up completely amazed. By that absurd demonstration of power, Haruto floats in the air and wonders astonished if that is the power of a manifestation blade. The principal says hunters risk their lives to protect peace and tells them to dream big. He encourages them to develop this potential at the academy and move forward believing in themselves. The man emphasizes that all who obtain this kind of power have a duty to make choices. Suddenly, students begin whispering in surprise upon spotting Akuta in the middle of that scene. Haruto confirms it really is him and starts wondering if his mentor was a famous hunter. The speech continues, saying it doesn't matter what divine weapon is wielded or the amount of training. Their value is determined by the reason for using them and tells everyone to think about why they are there. He tells them to find value in that reason, stating that this is the academy's first lesson. With a confident smile, he invites everyone to celebrate the beginning of this great new journey. A massive streak of golden light cuts through space and surrounds the bodies of all the new students. Haruto gets quite scared and surprised upon feeling the sudden change in the surrounding environment. The group suddenly reappears on a beautiful sunny lawn under trees filled with cherry blossoms. The mentor smiles in a friendly way at the class and congratulates everyone on enrolling at the academy. The youths celebrate enthusiastically and comment that a renowned hunter always comes to encourage the rookies, but they get even more hyped upon realizing that this year it was the Sword Emperor himself. Haruto goes into complete shock upon hearing his title and shouts in surprise about the Sword Emperor. The guy remembers this hunter is the pinnacle of warriors and the greatest symbol of strength in this era. The legendary warrior notices his reaction from afar and gives a knowing wink to the boy. He mentally complains that his mentor should have revealed such an important detail way earlier. Sometime later, the students gather in front of the first-year building for Class 3. Inside the room, some students comment emotionally that they almost cried during earlier speech. Haruto walks in confused and complains about getting lost, not understanding why every class has its own building. Suddenly, Kusabi appears right behind him and sternly commands everyone to take their seats. He introduces himself as the teacher and warns he will be teaching the subject of Shikigami manipulation. The class begins whispering upon noticing he belongs to the famous Kusabi family of master on myojis. One of the girls comments fascinated about how handsome he is and wonders if he's single. The teacher asks for silence and explains that everyone's main purpose there is to become hunters. He emphasizes that, to achieve this goal, each person will need to obtain certification. Kusabi reminds them that daily combat against demons is extremely dangerous and can cost lives. He explains it is necessary to master swordsmanship, martial arts, onmyo jutsu, or shikigami manipulation. The man firmly warns that obtaining these certifications is mandatory in order to graduate. While the other students already knew everything, Haruto finally begins to understand the system there. The teacher tells everyone to follow him to show the true meaning of being certified. They head to a large open field where several black stone pillars stand in a row. Kusabi warns that today's test consists of summoning a shikigami and destroying the stone pillar. He says the test requires months of practice, but that he will grant the license today to whoever succeeds. The freshman begins smiling very confidently, commenting that this level of magic is something pretty basic. It all begins when a student places his finger on a magic paper, which starts glowing intensely. The long-haired boy smiles confidently and says he will be the first to complete the test. He shouts with determination and commands his flying creature to attack the stone pillars. The shikigami collides with the obstacle, generating a strong impact of blue energy. However, when the dust clears, the stone pillar remains intact without a single scratch. Kusabi warns there is no time limit or limit on attempts, and that he can try as many times as he wants. The student curses, wanting to try again, while other students prepare quite anxiously. A green-haired boy watches the others fail and thinks they don't have a single chance. He reflects that basic shikigami skills would never be enough at Togoku Academy. At that moment, he notices Haruto staring at the paper in his hands with a completely lost look. He approaches and asks why Haruto isn't going, and the guy admits he has never created a shikigami. The boy is shocked that he doesn't know something basic that even regular schools teach everyone. Haruto gives an awkward laugh and asks if his classmate could teach him how to do it. The green-haired youth is surprised by the request, but ends up accepting to help his new friend. Meanwhile, the other students continue tired and complaining that the test is way too hard. A guy complains that the pillar is so hard that not even his manifestation blade would scratch it. Kusabi explains that a demon hunter shouldn't fight solely using their divine weapon in combat. He emphasizes that Onmyojutsu serves precisely to make up for what their blade lacks, and summons a gigantic white tiger, stating that their standard of demand is extremely high. The tiger charges in the blink of an eye and destroys the stone pillars with extreme ease. The teacher coldly warns that something so simple should be like second nature to them. He questions whether the students thought entering the academy would automatically make them hunters. Kusabi says only those who graduate will be hunters, telling everyone to wake up to the harsh reality. He warns that everyone will need 6 certifications to pass the year and tells them to use their time well. He thinks he should crush their illusions until he is interrupted by a shout of celebration. The green-haired boy stands shocked seeing Haruto celebrate for creating his first shikigami. Kusabi gets startled by the voice and remembers Akuta's request for him to keep an eye on the boy. Haruto is completely enchanted and pets the small, rabbit-shaped shikigami. Kusabi slaps his hand to his forehead and wonders what the Sword Emperor saw so special in the guy. One of the girls also summons a cute little dog, leaving the other students speechless. Kusabi points to Haruto's small rabbit and says that performance is completely out of the question. He tells Haruto to relearn the basics, frustrated that his goofy attitude is infecting the room. The teacher ends the class for the day and tells everyone to exert more effort next time. Haruto looks at the school map and thinks he needs to memorize that massive campus. Toya appears by surprise, criticizing his pathetic performance, making the boy annoyed. The rival complains that it's very rude to make such an ugly face as soon as he sees him. Haruto remembers his rival attacked him out of nowhere, but Toya tells him not to hold a grudge over foolishness. He changes the subject and asks if Haruto is also looking for his dorm on the map. Haruto comments that he needs to pick a room by the end of the day, leaving his rival surprised. Toya stands baffled by his slowness, but the protagonist says everything happened way too fast. He says that before he used to sleep in a cramped storage room and that just having a roof against the rain was enough. The blue-haired guy says that to be a hunter, he needs to organize his living environment. Toya pokes his chest and reminds him that, like it or not, he was recommended by the Emperor himself. He walks away, telling his partner not to show such pathetic behavior around. The boy walks reflectively and thinks it still hasn't sunk in that Akuta is the strongest of all. Meanwhile, the green-haired classmate watches him from afar and stands shocked by the discovery he thinks he was trying so hard to create a connection with Toya, only to discover that the clumsy Haruto holds the recommendation of the Great Sword Emperor. He theorizes that by having this recommendation without knowing the basics, Haruto must have hidden talent. He sees that as his own destiny and decides to flatter Haruto to guarantee a brilliant career. As Haruto decides to look for the dorm first, someone suddenly shouts for him. It's the classmate from earlier who excitedly introduces himself as Inari Itsuna and says his name. Inari says he decided to look for him to help with other difficulties, leaving Haruto very grateful. Inari comments that being in the same class is destiny and suggests they become great friends. The protagonist happily celebrates making a friend, while Inari thinks he made a great impression. Haruto explains he was having trouble picking a dorm, and Inari tries to help him. Just then, the protagonist's phone rings with a message from Akuta, scaring his new friend. Akuta sends a recommendation in a casual tone suggesting Tsukumo dorm. Inari stands shocked, seeing the Sword Emperor himself recommending a dorm. Haruto decides to go check out the place, and Inari insists on tagging along immediately. They start searching for the location until they hear a desperate scream echoing nearby. A student runs past in panic, crying hard out of fear of something. The two get quite confused and try to understand what is happening there. Suddenly, a giant bottle of sake falls in front of them, and a voice asks if there are more freshmen. A muscular redhead woman watches them drinking sake and calls them skinny brats. Haruto asks who she is, and the woman answers that she is the dorm mother. The guy looks at the building covered in vines and realizes the dorm was right there. He explains he came because the place was recommended, leaving Inari surprised for also being included. She smiles slyly and asks if Haruto is the boy Akuta had spoken about. Inari stands shocked, seeing the woman speak of the Sword Emperor so casually. She then says that to enter, they need to show some special trick. The woman states she decides who enters the dorm and demands something that manages to impress her. She seriously warns that if they show some really boring trick, she will break one of their bones, menacingly assuring them that it's not a threat. She crushes the glass bottle with her bare hands to prove she means business. They finally understand why the other student ran away and realize she is completely crazy. Inari suggests getting out of there for, safety, but Haruto stands thoughtfully analyzing the place. He thinks that if Akuta recommended it, it must be worth it, and that the infirmary heals a broken bone. The protagonist excitedly decides to accept the challenge, but Inari desperately screams at the craziness. The woman grabs Inari by surprise and warns she will start the test with the green-haired boy. She asks if he is going to do the trick right away or not, leaving him sweating nervously. The youth curses annoyed and warns her not to blame him for whatever happens. He begins slicing a cabbage incredibly fast and with great skill. Next, the boy tosses a burning frying pan with professional culinary techniques. He finishes by preparing a marvelous feast full of delicious dishes. The dorm woman picks up a meatball with chopsticks and tries it with a critical look. He smiles proudly and guarantees he can prepare perfect snacks to go with drinks. She gives the verdict approving the guy, who celebrates immensely relieved with the result. She turns to Haruto and asks what he knows how to do, and the boy answers he only knows how to cut things. The woman smiles, layout challenging, and tells him to show all his skill with the sword with impressive agility.
She takes a huge leap and climbs to the top of the cherry blossom tree. She picks up a glowing flower petal and says the test begins now. She explains she will release the petal with magic and that he will pass if he manages to slice it before it drops. Inari thinks the challenge is absurdly hard,
but Haruto accepts trying anyway. The woman releases the enchanted petal into the air and tells the guy to get ready. She remembers Akuta asking her to take care of Haruto when he arrived there. She reflects on how rare it is for the Sword Emperor to ask her to take care of someone, and decides that this only makes her want to make things harder for the rookie. With a quick movement, she makes an actual storm of petals rain down from the tree. She thinks that if his trick is cutting, he must be capable of dealing with that storm. Haruto raises his sword quickly and executes a precise cut amid that storm. He finishes the movement with flawless posture while the petals float around. The boy celebrates making it, leaving Inari surprised since he couldn't see anything. The protagonist shows half of the petal, shocking his friend for having sliced and caught the leaf. He comments that the other half must be around there. While the woman observes him in silence, the woman realizes the petal was completely enveloped in spiritual energy in mid-air. She notes that managing to slice something like that without losing sight of it requires exceptional vision. And the most impressive thing of all is that he didn't slice a single other petal around it. She smiles and says he passed, remembering that this feat resembles Akuta's student days. She reflects that turbulent days await these boys, while Haruto displays his achievement. The next day, Haruto wakes up with his alarm, remembering Akuta's advice about his blade. The sun shines, illuminating the entire beautiful brick facade of Tsukumo dorm. Haruto opens the door in pajamas and gets confused by what he sees in the kitchen. Upon waking up, Inari, already wearing an apron, greets him and mentions he woke up quite early this morning. The guy asks why he's wearing that outfit, and Inari says the place's owner made him help out. Haruto asks about the other residents, and the owner says everyone must still be sleeping. They sit down, and the boy thanks her greatly for the delicious meal that was prepared. The protagonist loves eating with company, while Inari complains he is exhausted from so much work. Haruto calls his friend and says he has something important he'd like to ask him. He asks if Inari knows how to talk with the entity of a manifestation blade. He explains he spoke with the creature in his mental world upon receiving his weapon for the first time. He says it mentioned the connection was weak, and Inari finds it rare for them to speak right off the bat. The dorm owner passes by them and explains there are several stages to this communication. Inari mentions there's a teacher obsessed with this at the academy who could help him with his questions. Haruto decides to clear up his doubts with this teacher at the end of today's class. Morning class begins with mandatory physical training for all students. The youths navigate a floating obstacle course that demands great agility from everyone. The pink-haired instructor shouts, telling no one to give up on such a rigorous test. Inari, struggling not to fall, complains in his thoughts that talking is easy. He reveals he is using all his energy just to handle the weights on his body. Meanwhile, Haruto runs swiftly and crosses the finish line ahead of everyone. The teacher praises his time, but points out that he is wasting movements. She warns that if he keeps using spiritual energy to cover up mistakes, he will stop evolving. The protagonist lets out a giggle, catching the instructor's attention while the others rest. He happily explains he's glad to finally be treated like a normal student there. She thinks that, since he never had a tutor before, he must learn everything he can at the academy. Suddenly, the instructor goes back to shouting at the class and orders 10 more punishment laps. In the afternoon period, new students gather for a theoretical lesson on swords. Professor Urushizaya begins explaining that the study of blades is like a philosophy. Inari struggles to keep his eyes open during the explanation of how the spiritual world works. He complains that earlier military training combined with the teacher's tone of voice makes him sleepy. Beside him, Haruto listens to everything glowing with excitement, leaving his friend surprised by his focus. The protagonist reflects that he is finally learning about this world he didn't know before. Inari observes Haruto's determination and smiles, thinking he's going to do really well. The green-haired boy ends up falling asleep at his desk and dreaming about forming a great team with him. At the end of class, Haruto runs to call for Professor Urushizaya in the hallway. He says he heard he is a specialist in the subject and asks questions about the god of the sword. The old professor instantly changes expression and gets extremely enthusiastic about the question. He starts running and asking 1,000 questions, leaving Haruto totally not knowing how to answer. Inari screams, tired, asking why the professor is running with so much excitement. Professor Urushizaya asks if the sword god told Haruto to awaken his blade's true power. The youth confirms, and the master says that came at a great time. The professor smiles mischievously and explains he also wants to take advantage of the situation to satisfy his own curiosity. He explains that a strong connection allows speaking with the sword god anytime. But since their link is weak, the fastest way is to get used to the weapon. The professor warns he knows the perfect place for that and asks the boys to follow him to a large pavilion. He takes them to the blade study training room. The master shares that the place has spiritual barriers strong enough to handle certification exams. As soon as they enter, the master points to a large wooden dummy and says it was because of this mechanical puppet that he brought them there. Haruto asks what that is, and the master reveals it is model number 7 of the blade replica, made with the best onmyo-jutsu techniques. Urushizaya shows there is a slot in the dummy's back to place the manifestation blade and tells the guy to insert it, receiving a positive response. Haruto pushes the sword into the compartment and gets startled by the equipment's immediate reaction. He feels his spiritual energy being drained suddenly and panics at that sensation. The professor calmly explains that the dummy analyzes the absorbed energy and transforms into an enemy with the same strength level as the user, terrifying Inari. The old master flashes a bizarre smile and warns that defeating this clone also counts as the official certification exam. He tells Haruto to fight the puppet to discover the sword's true potential, and the boy agrees, quite tense. Inari questions if it's safe to do the exam so suddenly, but the master assures everything is fine since he is the responsible instructor. He reminds them that Kamikiri placed first in recent tests and even defeated a high-level demon in the 3rd exam. Hearing this, Inari stands shocked upon realizing his friend is even stronger than the talented Ryudoji Urushizaya. Says Haruto's skill is already sufficient, but whispers that he really wants to study his blade, making Inari scream annoyed. The professor thinks to himself that he is dying of curiosity to know what is hidden in the weapon chosen by the Sword Emperor. Urushizaya asks if Inari isn't also curious, and the boy gets scared thinking the master discovered the reason he hangs out with Haruto so much. The old man mentally hopes the god dwelling inside the boy's weapon likes the special mechanical dummy prepared for it. Outside, a huge barrier is activated to ensure no spiritual energy leaks, turning the place into a small sealed world. Dark slime begins overflowing from the mechanical dummy, while Haruto keeps holding his sword firmly. Suddenly, a massive column of dark energy explodes from the dummy, completely scaring the protagonist. Haruto leaps backward quickly to distance himself from that mysterious and dangerous force. A sinister voice coming from the darkness comments that the wooden body is fragile, yet still quite useful. The protagonist stands totally shocked upon hearing that and tries to comprehend what is happening there. The dark being fully manifests in the form of a terrifying winged demon and lets out a sigh of disdain. The professor realizes, horrified, that the entity analyzed the dummy and possessed it. While Inari panics completely without understanding a thing, Haruto senses an absurd, malevolent presence coming from the opponent and has no doubts about the danger he is facing. The boy instantly recognizes the creature's eyes and realizes it is the same terrible demon from before. Inari terrified questions if that monster really is what was hidden inside his friend's weapon. The demon gazes at the others around with contempt and mutters that people are blocking the way. Suddenly, Inari and Professor Urushizaya perceive something dangerous and widen their eyes in shock. The monster makes a swift movement and delivers a devastating attack in their direction. The strike hits the ground with brutal force, generating a massive curtain of smoke and destruction. Haruto shields himself from the heavy shockwave caused by the dust and tries to see what is left of the room. Looking to the side, the protagonist falls into despair seeing his friend and professor lying injured on the floor. Haruto screams, asking what the creature did, but the demon merely orders him coldly to keep quiet. The monster complains that the guy is far too weak and that if he keeps almost passing away before it reaches its goal, nothing will work out. The demon then warns it will teach Haruto how to use true spiritual power using his own body. The dark being prepares to attack and commands the youth not to get distracted under any circumstances. The enemy charges forward with a terrifying attack that slices through the whole surrounding scenery in the blink of an eye. It appears in a split second right behind Haruto and questions how a challenger can hesitate so much during combat. The youth tries to dodge, but the impact creates a large crater in the ground with the blow's shock. The demon taunts, asking if he isn't going to strike back with everything, and Haruto responds annoyed, saying he hasn't even started yet. The creature observes the puppet's wooden hand and admits it is a rather convenient body to fight with. The being ponders that the dummy's durability has many flaws, and Haruto immediately thinks that if he stalls the fight, the enemy might self-destruct. The demon points at him and says it can clearly read those cowardly thoughts stamped on his face. Next, it fires a devastating blast with its sharp claws that destroys everything in its path. As combat rages fiercely, Inari remains down and bleeding heavily near the destroyed wall. The demon seriously warns that the next time it attacks, the strike will hit Haruto directly. The protagonist gets furious and curses the opponent. Feeling the weight of the threat amid danger, Haruto shouts that his goal is only to help and tells the monster not to involve innocent people. But the creature counters, saying it was the boy himself who put them within the attack's reach. The dark being warns it has no time to lose. It threatens that if the youth doesn't defeat it before the puppet rots, the two injured witnesses will pass away right there. Desperate and irritated by the taunt, Haruto channels his strength and screams for the monster not to mess with him. The boy attacks with everything, but the demon manages to block the strike and displays a sneer on its wooden face. Haruto is surprised to see his attack collided with an extremely hard spiritual barrier. Realizing this, he concludes he just needs to apply even more of his energy. The demon moves quickly and calls the guy slow. It mocks, asking what enemy would wait patiently for such a slow power charge. The opponent tells the boy to use his head to think of something better, calling him a failure while continuing to deliver blows. Haruto notices the disadvantage and devises a plan to hide a second attack behind the first blocked strike. However, the monster's counterattack hits him square on, throwing him violently onto the arena floor. The demon explains that the slicing technique should be infinitely sharp due to accumulated energy. It points out that the youth can't even coat the blade with that energy. Haruto acknowledges he lacked the strength to cut the barrier, but he reflects that to put enough power into the sword, he will always need time to charge. The monster begins considering if it wouldn't be much better to eliminate the boy once and for all to force him to truly awaken. Haruto flies into a rage at the threat to Inari, his first real friend, and commands the creature to stop talking such nonsense. The being mocks, saying that shouting this kind of drama only serves to motivate an adversary even more on the battlefield. Totally desperate, the protagonist screams for the enemy to stop the deadly advance toward his companions. He uses his own body as a shield and steps in front of his unconscious allies, blocking the violent slash with his sword. The monster gloats, saying that if the youth loses his first friend, his heart will be shattered. It adds that only a miserable and lonely life will remain for the boy. It adds that losing someone due to his own weakness will bring unbearable regret that the guy will never overcome. Haruto feels uncontrollable rage, realizing the demon is playing with his feelings and with the lives of precious people. However, the protagonist takes a deep breath and realizes things can be different on this attempt. He remembers when he managed to execute a perfect cut on the barrier before, even without having put that much spiritual energy into the sword. He focuses on understanding what exactly he did differently on that occasion to reach that devastating result. The demon taunts him again, reminding that you can only protect others while they are alive, and tells the boy to attack it already. Haruto shouts that he didn't need its advice and charges forward fiercely to force his way through that monster. He delivers a direct frontal blow, but the demon easily blocks using one of its circular magic shields. The dark being deflects the attack with extreme ease and mocks the boy, saying his strike was too weak and light. With a cold look, the adversary tells the protagonist to concentrate more if he really wants to win. Right after, it delivers an extremely fast grazing strike that throws the guy far away from his defensive field. The dark energy impact explodes against the pavilion floor, spreading cracks and dust throughout the scene. Haruto stands perplexed, without understanding how the monster delivers such strong attacks with such light movements and without time to gather energy. He recalls the advice about how he was just trying to compensate everything with tons of energy, wasting power and going straight into a dead end. He realizes the secret is eliminating waste, remembering that to achieve this, he needs to adjust his stance and movement. The guy comprehends that it all comes down to perfectly controlling the flow of that spiritual energy through his body. The demon advances again to deliver another merciless slashing attack against the cornered protagonist. Haruto manages to dodge at the last second, leaping over the debris while the power gem glows in the shadows. The monster lets out an exclamation of surprise and decides to test if that agile dodge by the boy was just pure luck. The dark being advances swiftly and warns it will find the answer with its next combat move. It misses the devastating attack by a hair's breadth and grumbles, annoyed seeing the target's precise and fast dodge. While moving mid-air, Haruto understands the secret was never trying to accumulate and store spiritual energy to use all at once. He compares it to stagnant water that ends up sitting still, whereas a violent waterfall can break even the largest rocks in its path. The boy realizes energy must circulate and concentrate where needed. Instead of just covering the entire body pointlessly, he focuses his mind entirely on guiding this flow of strength while falling toward his monstrous opponent. Haruto channels energy from his spiritual center, passing through his back, shoulders, and arms until reaching his hands. The concentrated power flows down through his fingertips, directly into the hilt of his manifestation blade. He summons all this destructive force into the blade, preparing the final attack with surgical and impressive precision. Seeing the threat approach, the demon quickly projects 3 circular magic shields to try to hold back the impact. With a deadly and determined look, Haruto delivers the focused strike without hesitating for even a fraction of a second. The attack pierces through the enemy's 3 defenses with extreme ease, while Haruto executes his special slicing technique to perfection. Haruto's focused blow cuts through space and splits the wooden dummy in half in an instant. He stands surprised and excited for having managed to break that extremely resistant barrier all at once. The demon, as it begins to vanish, explains that localized concentration is the true foundation for energy reinforcement. It smiles and tells the guy to extract the real value of his sword, saying he finally met the required conditions. Back to reality, Haruto looks astonished at his manifestation blade, which begins vibrating and glowing intensely. The demon grumbles in his mind that the boy is a host that gives a lot of trouble, while a mysterious light emerges. Haruto is taken to his own mental world, where he comes across a giant purple eye praising his arrival on his own. The colossal creature warns that now it can finally transmit its true goal to the guy. The monster introduces itself as Mutin, the Matchless, and reveals it rose to the surface looking for a man with a specific sword. It describes the target as someone who wields a manifestation blade with an edge as translucent and clear as ice. Intrigued by the story, Haruto asks why the creature is looking for this mysterious swordsman. Upon hearing the answer, Haruto is shocked to realize the monster wants him to end a person, but Mutin says that man is also his enemy. The being adds that if he understands the nature of the man and manages to forgive him, he won't need to eliminate him, though it doubts that will happen. Haruto agrees to at least look for the man to keep his word, but imposes an important condition in exchange for the favor with a threatening look. He demands that the demon never again involve or hurt the people around him in its affairs. Mutin accepts the deal and says that for Haruto to protect what he loves and fulfill his part, he will need to get much stronger from now on. It adds that this is the inevitable destiny the youth must carry for having gotten involved with it. Back in the real world, the boy sheathes his sword in silence beside the destroyed remains of the training dummy. Haruto wonders if the demon is a reasonable entity, but gets startled when Professor Urushizaya suddenly appears examining him closely. The professor calmly explains that sword gods always want to dialogue, so creating that opportunity is part of his duty as a tutor. The master thinks that even as just a manifestation trick, it is impressive how the entity managed to take over the wooden body so freely. He notes the sinister presence left in the air and admits that if it weren't a training dummy, he himself would have had to draw his sword to fight. Haruto laments and apologizes to the professor, blaming himself for ending up hurting his first real friend in that mess. The master calms him, saying he did very well on the test and assures that Inari will certainly understand the whole situation. The master reflects on the sinister shadows hovering over the world recently and how Haruto emerged in the middle of it, hoping his old intuition is wrong. As he walks thoughtfully down the academy hallway, the old man feels that something very serious is about to happen. Haruto tries to help the fallen Inari, while the professor thinks that the gears of fate have finally begun to move. He senses an uneasiness hovering over the world, as if something previously drawn by fate were slowly awakening. Sometime later, all students are already back in their seats in the classroom to continue with the theoretical subject. Inari, already recovered, asks his friend in a low voice how the mess with the certification test they were doing earlier ended. Haruto whispers that he passed, but explains the professor can't make it official on the first day, so he needs to hand in a report first. Inari is impressed upon realizing his friend practically managed to pass already and congratulates him joyfully. Haruto apologizes for involving him in that, but Inari tells him not to worry because friends exist precisely to support each other. Moved by his companion's kindness and support, the protagonist flashes a genuine smile and thanks him from his heart. Inari smiles, happy to have a friend like that, thinking that even having passed out, he ended up gaining Haruto's gratitude out of pure luck. Professor Kusabi steps to the front of the room and explains that in today's class, students will have a practical session before actual combat training. He orders the class to divide into trusted trios and cooperate with each other, as team partners will protect their lives. Inari questions what they'll do to find the third member of the group, and Haruto admits he doesn't know anyone else besides him in class. As they talk, the two notice the rest of the room organizing quickly and don't know where to go. Inari despairs, thinking they were left behind, but a purple-haired girl timidly approaches their desk. She hesitantly asks if there's still a spot on their team, and Haruto accepts immediately with a welcoming smile. The group heads to the special training building, where an intermediate demon acts as boss alongside several weak Shikigami. The teacher warns that the main goal of the practical test is to defeat all these threats and ensure the safety of the location. The trio takes position at the dark entrance of the mansion, and the instructor's voice authorizes the start of the test for team number 8. Haruto finds it fun having to fight as a team, but Inari alerts him not to defeat all enemies alone this time. The protagonist agrees, laughing, and says he is counting on the support of their new teammate, named Funo. Funo smiles friendly and thanks them for Haruto's warm reception. Informing the team, Inari asks what her combat style is, and Funo reveals she is an attack type and possesses the fire element. She explains she is a support type and doesn't fight very well alone, so Inari suggests they advance together to maintain safety. Inari then asks the protagonist to focus on exploring the area, and Haruto immediately agrees with the division of tasks. Inari thinks all cocky that it's very stylish when a guy takes leadership of the group. While Haruto defeats an enemy in the background, Haruto notices enemies starting to appear and warns he will investigate the upper floor, leaving the others behind. Inari complains about being left behind, but later reflects that it's better not to let anyone see how incredible Kamakiri actually is. Inari decides to clear the first floor alone and asks for Funo's support, who timidly agrees as shadows draw near. The green-haired boy draws his flaming sword and shouts with determination to kick off his combat. Inari executes his special fire technique called Flaming Sky, attacking the demon with a blast of heat. However, the blade gets too hot and he starts jumping in pain. Complaining that the firepower is exaggerated and needs to tone down, Funo nervously apologizes and warns that more opponents are coming, deciding to activate magic to also increase his speed. With the sudden speed buff active, Inari gains absurd and uncontrollable speed that sends him speeding down the hallway. Unable to control his far too fast body, he ends up slamming his head hard against one of the mansion walls. Inari lies on the floor very dizzy, while Funo silently reflects that providing speed support in enclosed spaces wasn't a good idea. Quite awkward, she apologizes again and decides it's better to change strategy to provide fire coverage for her companion. She conjures a massive attack of green energy that almost hits Inari, missing the boy by a hair's breadth while exploding the wall. The boy dodges, terrified, and shouts that the attack grazed him, almost taking him along with the devastating impact. Totally spent from the dangerous situation, Inari asks the girl to take it easy and stop trying to accidentally eliminate him. He looks sideways at her and confesses that, at this point, it even seems like she is making these mistakes on purpose. Funo stands surrounded by a mysterious green aura, hiding a giggle and showing that her intentions are quite different. She displays a terrifying smile and thinks to herself that pretending all of those are just accidents is way harder than she imagined. Inari notices the change in atmosphere and, suspicious, asks himself what that mysterious girl really wants there. She continues smiling and thinks she has absolutely nothing against Inari, revealing she doesn't even know the green-haired boy's name. She merely wishes for him to sleep for a few days so that, in tomorrow's training, she can have Kamakiri all to herself. Without hesitating, Funo executes a fast slicing technique called Wind Needle in the direction of her own team ally. Inari dodges with difficulty and realizes in dread her unhealthy obsession with Kamakiri, concluding that girl is completely insane. The boy firmly positions himself for combat and decides he can no longer falter before that real threat. If she decides to act like a real enemy, Inari won't hesitate to use all his strength to defeat her right there. He remembers that, through the element cycle, her wind will only make his fire even stronger, challenging her to see who leaves injured. He knows she is a support type and trusts his threatening posture will be enough to crush the girl's fighting spirit. He sneeringly tells her to hold still, while summoning a few floating creatures made of pure water around him. Suddenly, a massive torrent of water and energy explodes and hits Inari extremely violently. The green-haired boy ends up fallen and completely soaked on the floor, not understanding where so much water power came from. Funo reveals water puts out fire, and that if natural elements don't help, she'll simply compensate using Onmyo Jutsu magic. Inari despairs on the floor, realizing that girl is much stronger using spiritual magic than with her own blade. She points her weapon in Inari's direction and coldly warns that their fight has just come to an end. Right there, Funo conjures the serpent rainwater technique, making the desperate Inari scream, complaining that isn't fair at all. However, before the blow hits him, the ceiling above Funo collapses with a loud crash, scaring the girl. Haruto falls from above along with the rubble, landing mounted on top of the giant demon he defeated on the upper floor. Inari shouts, relieved seeing his friend arrive right in time, while Haruto thanks finding them and thinks together they'll do well. Inari stammers surprised and tries to alert Kamakiri about the sinister teammate who was trying to attack them. Until now, Funo instantly changes her attitude, glowing with joy and saying she's extremely happy. Kamakiri saved her again. Haruto finds the word odd and tries to dig through his memory, where it was that they originally met before that training day. The boy widens his eyes and asks if by any chance they met during the third exam forest. Funo happily celebrates him remembering her, while Haruto confesses she changed her appearance so much it was hard to recognize her. The girl timidly confesses she tried very hard to completely change her look just to please Kamakiri. She asks if she looks pretty with the new hairstyle, and the protagonist awkwardly answers, yes. Left out of the conversation and all beat up, Inari furiously pops up in the background demanding room to speak about what happened. Funo apologizes, saying her magic ended up undoing itself, leaving poor Inari completely silent and annoyed. She happily clings to Haruto's arm and praises him for defeating the chief demon of that special training area. Inari observes that scene with disgust and mentally concludes they ended up teaming up with a completely crazy girl. Funo cheerfully mentions they finished clearing the place and suggests going to make the report, while Inari laments the bad luck of meeting her. The day comes to an end at the academy as the large red brick building gets covered by the falling night shadows. As they walk down the dorm hallway, Inari complains that today was extremely exhausting, and Haruto asks if something different happened. Inari tries to brush it off, saying it was nothing, but soon confesses he actually had a serious problem with that weird girl, Funo. Suddenly, Funo herself quietly emerges right behind them with a docile smile on her face and asks what's up with her. Inari gets a huge fright and questions what she's doing at Tsukumo dorm, but Funo reveals she also lives there, leaving him incredulous at the news. Inari highly suspects the coincidence and remembers seeing the girl observing everything from afar during the recent dorm admission test. Before the guy can say anything more, Funo quickly steps forward and covers Inari's mouth with her hand, maintaining her calm and serene smile. She stares at him up close with a dark look and whispers, asking if he knows well what will happen should he decide to tell anyone this. Oblivious to all that secret tension, Haruto just watches the two from afar and innocently asks what's wrong with them. Inari disguises his fear and suggests that, since they are now partners, they should swap contacts, leaving Haruto very surprised and happy at his friend's idea. The protagonist grabs his phone smiling and thinks emotionally that he never imagined the day of finally swapping contacts with friends would arrive in his life. He happily puts the device away and says he's looking forward to working together with both of them again in tomorrow's training. In the background, Funo and Inari whisper mutual threats while Haruto walks away happy, naively thinking the two have already become great friends. The following morning, the class arrives at an abandoned hospital for lower demon elimination testing, a place that accumulated tons of harmful miasma. Instructor Kusabi explains they will face real demons and, therefore, invited an active professional demon hunter to help with security. Kusabi introduces the guest as Mr. Ozuchi, asking for everyone's respect, and the hunter merely greets the class in a very casual way. Students begin whispering, excited and surprised, immediately recognizing the famous elite hunter Yuma Ozuchi among them. Haruto gets confused and asks if the man is really someone famous, leaving Inari incredulous for him not knowing such a prominent figure. Inari shares that the hunter is first class and had the highest number of demon eliminations last year, making Haruto find it all incredible. Suddenly, Yuma Ozuchi pops up between the two boys, throwing his arms over their shoulders and humbly commenting that it's not that big a deal. He explains that a high elimination count just means he spent all his time fighting weaklings, so there's no reason to brag. Inari gets startled by the hunter's speed, while Kusabi coughs awkwardly and asks everyone to keep chatter to a minimum. He asks for absolute attention from the whole class to proceed with explanations and important details of today's practical mission. While the instructor speaks, the hunter whispers to Haruto that the boy has sharp eyes. Since he managed to track his fast movements the whole time, Kusabi regains control of the situation and explains that each team will receive a specific area of the abandoned hospital to operate in during practical training. The master shows the hospital floor plan and orders each team to clear and eliminate all demons that appear in their designated sectors. The guest laughingly warns that if they falter, they will pass away for real, making instructor Kusabi immediately scold him for lacking tact with students. Ozuchi tries to cheer up the class, saying the best team will win a barbecue feast paid by him, leaving the instructor even more annoyed at the attitude. Haruto starts drooling, just thinking about grilled meat, drawing the attention of Inari and Funo, who notice how easily their friend was hooked by the reward. Team number 8 receives responsibility for clearing the 5th and 6th floors of the West Wing, and everyone gets excited to give their best on the mission. Upon crossing the gates, the protagonist senses that the hospital's sinister and heavy presence got infinitely stronger than it seemed from outside. Suddenly, a small purple creature appears floating right on top of Haruto's head, scaring the boy with its sudden appearance. The protagonist jumps in fright, asking where the being came from, and the creature answers it smelled a demon and just came to take a look at the area. The little monster warns that someone is creating an artificial rift on the outside, and Haruto deduces it must be Professor Kusabi's work on the roof. Haruto asks how demons manage to enter the human world in the first place, wanting to better understand how these miasma rifts work. The small being mocks the guy for living so long without knowing this, receiving an annoyed response from Haruto telling it to shut up already. The creature goes on to explain that miasma generated by human activities and feelings ends up acting as a vessel to attract demons. When this miasma becomes heavily concentrated in a region, a rift is created, a prime spot for dozens of much stronger demons to emerge. The small floating being then points toward the hallway window and tells Haruto to take a look at what is happening outside. Looking out the window, Haruto spots a huge magic circle glowing in the sky, and the little monster confirms it's the barrier used to control miasma. It explains the magic circle acts like a control valve, used to deliberately attract weaker demons so they consume the area's miasma. Haruto praises Muten's knowledge about the human world, and the small creature merely answers with boredom that it's all far too obvious just by looking. Meanwhile, on the ground floor, Hunter Yuma Ozuchi gets lost on the hospital map and stands confused, not knowing which wing of the building he is actually in at that moment. He ignores the shouting of a group of students fighting right behind him against a mid-level demon to stay focused on trying to read his map. Incredibly fast and effortlessly, Ozuchi turns around and eliminates the monster with a single strike, leaving the students completely jaw-dropped. He warns them, saying their action was reckless, and advises that if they want to live a long time, they need to learn to widen their field of view in combat. The boys, amazed at such skill from the veteran, merely agree respectfully with heads bowed at the valuable lesson atop the building. Professor Kusabi maintains his focus, active, using his floating paper talismans to control the entire magic barrier. Ozuchi pops up sitting on the roof ledge and asks why the master doesn't go down there to give a word of encouragement to students instead of just watching from above. Kusabi coldly answers that a true professional maintains a broad view, but Ozuchi counters, saying he was referring to his mindset. The hunter takes the moment to ask since when Kusabi started teaching that subject. Wanting to know what happened to the previous course instructor, Kusabi shares that Mr. Maneki wasn't feeling well, and that the principal personally asked him to substitute for him that morning, leaving the hunter thoughtful. He remembers accepting the substitution without problems, but still questioned the reason he was specifically chosen for this task. Principal Kaname, with his back turned in his office, thinks for a moment about what would be the best way to explain his decision to Professor Kusabi. The principal shares that one day he saw 3 sparrows lined up on a windowsill, leaving Kusabi quite confused by that random story. The man explains that simple scene wouldn't leave his head, but he ended up ignoring the strange bad feeling that something was wrong. The principal reveals that on that exact day, he lost 3 friends on a mission, lives that could have been saved had he paid a little more attention. Ever since, he became extremely attentive to any minimal anomaly in daily life, and therefore wanted to entrust today's supervision to the most capable professor. The principal wraps up saying that if nothing happens, Kusabi can just laugh it off and have a drink with Ozuchi for him, making the hunter comprehend the situation. The professor thinks the Kaname brothers are incredible either way. Admitting one can't fully ignore the academy principal's sharp intuition, Kusabi seriously reflects that Class 3 on its own already has enough unsettling and mysterious elements to keep him on constant alert. Ozuchi comments on the boy Akuda rescued, pointing out that despite having a dark sword, he has good friends and doesn't look like he'll stray off path. Kusabi thinks they have nothing to do with that other person from the past, but cuts his thoughts off shouting Yuma's name suddenly. The hunter asks him not to get annoyed and warns the professor is letting personal feelings cloud his judgment, advising him to focus on the present. In the middle of the hospital hallway, Haruto shouts to alert his team companions that a mid-level demon is advancing fast in their direction. A huge red creature appears on the ceiling and prepares to deliver a deadly attack against Inari and Funo, who are right below. Inari asks to work together this time, but Funo ironically counters saying he's the one who should learn to cooperate in combat. Both grit their teeth with determination, individually thinking they need to show their true worth to make Kamakiri acknowledge their strength. The two jump at the same time and attack the demon with fury, shouting at each other to stop getting in the way of their partner's combat path. Haruto watches them fight with so much drive and thinks impressed that the two must be truly desperate to win that barbecue feast. High above, under the rain, a mysterious figure in a straw hat watches the magic circles and comments on the excellent sacrifices gathered there, amid lightning and thunder. The mysterious warrior draws his sharp sword with great agility and prepares for combat. He throws himself into freefall toward the abandoned hospital, cutting through the glowing spiritual barrier without any difficulty. On the roof, Kusabi and Ozuchi feel a sudden threatening vibration in the air, while Haruto also senses imminent danger from where he is. Back in the hallway, Inari and Funo face dark smoke coming out of one of the doors and take guard positions to perform a surprise attack. Suddenly, a huge stone monster smashes through the door with violence, creating immense destruction and throwing Funo against the wall. Inari shouts, worried, asking if she's okay, while the girl stares terrified at that colossal and grotesque multi-headed creature. Haruto pops up in a split second heroically and delivers a precise sword strike, severing the creature's arms to protect his classmate. The protagonist smoothly lands with weapon in hand and asks with great concern if Funo ended up suffering any injury. Still scared, she asks if that was also a mid-level demon, and Haruto answers honestly he isn't sure about its rank. Haruto warns to keep their guard up because he senses many others coming when Professor Kusabi's voice suddenly echoes through the loudspeaker. He warns that someone destroyed the control barrier, causing an absurd amount of miasma to invade the hospital and raise the danger level. Kusabi mentions he is sending a paper support Shikigami to guide each team and orders them to focus strictly on surviving and defending. Inari stands incredulous at the announcement, but Funo suggests they just hold firm until instructors arrive to help them, and Haruto agrees. Little Muten warns that miasma consumed the entire area and that this will attract demons much worse than high-level ones, scaring the protagonist. The demon seriously warns that an even more terrible and dangerous existence is about to manifest in the abandoned hospital. It reveals in a terrifying tone that the creature about to emerge is a dreadful and devastating special class demon. Instructor Kusabi repeats the maximum danger warning over the loudspeaker, again ordering all students to prioritize their own survival. Inari asks exhausted if they managed to clear the whole floor, but Haruto warns him not to lower his guard because other monsters could pop up anytime. The protagonist agreeingly ponders and decides the best thing to do is wait for the arrival of the paper Shikigami promised by Professor Kusabi. Suddenly, one of the hallway walls explodes violently, throwing massive chunks of concrete in the student's direction. Inari desperately shouts for his friend and tells Funo to focus on the enemy, while jumping backward trying to escape the gigantic opponent that just invaded the place. Haruto feels an overwhelming spiritual pressure coming from the colossal, red-skinned opponent and concludes it must be a high-level demon. Funo grits her teeth in anger and shouts back at Inari saying she doesn't need him reminding her to focus on combat. She quickly conjures a small water spirit in serpent form to attack the colossal monster's face and try to blind it. She uses her serpent rain technique and thinks that even if the blow doesn't hurt the high-level monster, at least it will serve to temporarily blind it. Instantly taking advantage of that perfect opening, Inari fiercely advances and executes his fire attack called Flaming Sky. However, the flaming blow collides against the opponent's stone hide, and Inari complains, scared about how the creature's skin is extremely hard. Haruto leaps with precision and nimbly executes his slicing claw technique to deliver a fatal strike against the monster's arm. He mentally celebrates upon realizing he managed to guide spiritual energy perfectly through his body. Just like he did in the previous test, Funo collapses sitting on the floor, placing her hand on her chest, extremely relieved to see everyone manage to come out unscathed from that dangerous combat. Inari finds it incredible that Haruto defeated the high-level demon with a single strike, but the protagonist answers it was thanks to the distraction they created. Inari smiles, saying he's happy to help, but thinks to himself that Haruto is evolving so fast, he'll soon be out of his reach. Suddenly, someone arrives by surprise and apologizes for the delay. Immediately drawing the attention of the entire group of students, Yuma Ozuchi appears riding spiritual wolves and asks if he arrived too late, making Inari shout the elite hunter's name upon recognizing him. Yuma apologizes for being late and warns they are the last ones missing, ordering everyone to head immediately to the rendezvous point. At the rendezvous point under the rain, students ask agitated what is happening, but Professor Kusabi demands silence to explain everything at once. Kusabi seriously reveals that someone destroyed the control barrier on purpose and that they confirmed the presence of several high-level demons in the area. Funo alerts that the hospital's demons will soon be drawn by their smell, making Inari suggest the best thing to do now is evacuate the location. Yuma shows a glowing piece of rock and warns that, unfortunately, it seems the enemy has zero intention of letting them escape from there. An immense dark purple energy suddenly surges around them, scaring everyone present in the hospital courtyard. Yuma explains that a cursed barrier was erected around Naraka and that it regenerates instantly even if they try to destroy it. Inari panics, but Professor Kusabi asks for calm and says that although communications dropped, the outside world has certainly noticed the anomaly. Yuma agrees with a sarcastic smile, saying everyone will be safe under Kusabi's protection, but the professor asks what he plans to do. Yuma then turns directly to Haruto and asks if he really is capable of defeating a high-level demon alone. With a provocative smile on his face, Yuma commands Haruto to stay there to help Professor Kusabi defend the other students. Kusabi complains that he can't decide that out of nowhere, but Yuma counters, saying they shouldn't waste capable warriors while the enemy corners them. Yuma observes the hospital building wrapped in dark fog and states that for a barrier of that size to exist, the caster needs to be inside Naraka. The elite hunter concludes with determination that the plan is simple, just needing him to invade the place to find and defeat the one responsible for the barrier. Professor Kusabi then calls Haruto's surname, and the youth promptly answers he is ready for whatever comes. Kusabi warns he will provide support to the boy, but makes a point to alert that this mission involves a real risk of passing away for everyone involved. With his red eyes glowing with determination, Haruto firmly exclaims he will complete the mission if it means saving everyone's lives. Impressed by the young hero's immediate and unhesitating response, Kusabi accepts the decision and says very well. Kusabi summons two massive protective spirit beasts and commands the other students not to leave there under any circumstances, calling Haruto to follow him. Yuma places his hand on the protagonist's shoulder and remarks that despite being a professor now, he is still an experienced demon hunter. Yuma says goodbye, saying he will leave the rest in their hands. While Professor Kusabi calls Haruto's attention to get started, Kusabi recalls that during the previous rescue they performed at the site, he was the one who determined what the team's priority would be. The professor admits that in direct one-on-one combat, he fully agrees Haruto is capable of beating a high-level demon. When a high-level demon surges in front of them, Kusabi warns he will sink everything and tells him to focus on just one opponent at a time. The protagonist quickly advances with his sword, delivering precise strikes to the monster with help from paper wolves, providing cover. Falling from the sky at high speed, the young warrior prepares a devastating blow directly against the creature's head as it tries to defend. He executes a perfect vertical slash that splits the monster in half, releasing a massive amount of cursed energy in the process. Far away, the other students watch the scene shocked and whisper impressed about how he managed to defeat a monster like that alone. Haruto immediately denies it and acknowledges he didn't win alone, as he received flawless support that seemed to anticipate every single one of his moves. Seeing the mastery and ease with which Professor Kusabi handles threats, Haruto realizes how absurd the true level of a hunter is. Suddenly, a colossal beam of dark purple energy strikes the abandoned hospital, generating a deafening crash that startles everyone. Sensing an overwhelming and malevolent spiritual pressure in the air, the protagonist begins to tremble and wonders where that terrible chill comes from. Professor Kusabi turns serious upon realizing the worst-case scenario actually happened and that a terrible creature just materialized. A gigantic, muscular, purple-skinned monster emerges amid the fog, revealing itself as a devastating special-level demon. The monstrous creature looks around with a macabre smile, commenting that it finally reached the surface and can sense tons of spiritual energy. A mysterious man in a straw hat sitting atop the building says he prepared that feast especially for it and asks if it likes it. The man reveals he was the one who set everything up in Naraka, gathering several blade wielders to create the perfect hunting environment for the demon. The demon gazes at the stranger with mockery and asks if he isn't afraid of ending up consumed as well for being a human right in the middle. The guy in the straw hat calmly answers that if a monster of that level had existed from the start, he wouldn't have had so much work from high in the sky. Hunter Yuma. Ozuchi drops at high speed toward the special level demon to initiate direct combat. Yuma lands nimbly and sarcastically comments that a special level demon really ended up appearing right in front of him. The warrior looks sideways at the man in the hat and thinks it would be fantastic if he could capture the barrier caster alive. The giant demon steps into Yuma's path, blocking his way, and lets out an ironic laugh, seeing the hunter trying to ignore it completely. Extremely irritated by the human's audacity, the special-level monster delivers a violent blow against Yuma, telling him not to cross its path. In the blink of an eye and with absurd speed, Yuma draws his blade and severs the creature's arm without the slightest difficulty. The elite hunter stares at the wounded monster with a cold and intimidating gaze, warning that a mere special-level demon should keep quiet. The demon stands in shock upon realizing that Hunter's overwhelming strength. Coming to understand it has zero chance of winning fighting like this desperate. The monster decides to change tactics and runs to devour the students first, to absorb spiritual energy and grow stronger. Yuma appears in a split second and sarcastically repeats for the creature to be quiet, easily blocking the enemy's advance. However, several chains pop up out of nowhere at high speed and force the hunter to use his swords to defend against the surprise attack. The warrior ends up lifted into the air by the mysterious chains, which leaves him extremely confused and on alert with that situation. Next, several other heavy chains rapidly spread and wrap around Yuma's body, leaving him completely immobilized in midair. He realizes the terrible mistake he made and immediately concludes those magic chains belong to the mysterious barrier caster. The man in the straw hat mocks the hunter and ironically asks if he should slice him into little pieces to make the demon's meal easier. Without giving time to react, the chains tighten violently and begin injuring Yuma's body, causing a massive amount of blood to gush, completely injured and incapacitated. The elite hunter plummets from above toward the ground of the abandoned hospital under heavy rain. From the top of the building, the mysterious man observes the fall and ironically asks if the hunter really thought he could capture him alive. With a dark and superior look, the villain coldly states that Warrior was far too arrogant for underestimating the danger. Yuma remains trapped and bloodied by the chains that continue draining his strength, leaving him out of commission at that critical moment. The caster then gives permission for the demon to devour everyone to its heart's content, announcing the start of a terrible blood feast. With a monstrous thud, the colossal demon lands right in front of Haruto and the scared students, ready to attack. The monster begins salivating grotesquely while staring at Haruto up close, commenting that the youth looks extremely tasty to eat. Sensing an overwhelming bloodlust that feels like needles piercing his skin, Haruto realizes the creature is completely different from everything else. Suddenly, the creature charges toward Inari with its mouth open, bellowing that it will consume him whole with just one big bite. In an extremely fast movement, Professor Kusabi steps in front of the attack and severs the monster's arm to save his student's life. The demon roars in pain upon being wounded and steps back a few paces, while the professor firmly positions himself to defend the students. Kusabi stares at the opponent with fury in his eyes and coldly asks who gave permission for it to point its murderous intent at his students. The creature retreats tense and wonders if that man in front of it is also on the same terrifying power level as the warrior from before. Inari notices his body is trembling uncontrollably out of terror and admits he would have been consumed if the professor hadn't been right there. Professor Kusabi finds that situation very suspicious and wonders how the demon managed to get past Yuma to reach the students. A mysterious voice from above mocks, asking if he's worried about his useless friend, and summoning circles appear under Kusabi's feet. Kusabi realizes it's a teleportation spell and shouts for Haruto to hold firm until he manages to return, but it's already too late to escape. The students fall into despair seeing the professor vanish before their eyes, leaving them completely unprotected. Haruto goes into full panic, but tries to forcefully calm down, thinking it's no time to hesitate and that he needs to act quickly. The demon lets out a malevolent laugh and celebrates, realizing the only troublesome human remaining there was sent far away. Satisfied with the professor's disappearance, the monster slowly turns in the direction of the youths and decides now it can finally start the massacre. The creature roars, announcing the moment has arrived to fill its belly with that feast. While Haruto prepares to fight alone, Haruto thinks to himself that now that the professor vanished, he has no other choice but to defeat that special-level demon alone. The hero fiercely charges forward and delivers his absolute claw technique in a swift and deadly attack against the side of the opponent's neck. The strike's impact cuts off a piece of the monster's limb cleanly, making the severed piece plummet directly onto the wet ground. The demon places its hand on its neck casually and merely lets out a mocking greeting to Haruto, showing it wasn't shaken at all. The monster ironically praises Haruto's spiritual weapon, admitting the strike almost reached its neck by a fraction of a second. Haruto stands incredulous upon realizing the enemy managed to dodge an almost certain strike, coming from such a disadvantageous position. The protagonist notices in despair that the left arm he had cut is already regenerating, and deduces that regular slicing attacks don't work. He analyzes the situation and realizes the monster kept distance from previous attacks, concluding the creature must be protecting its neck. Determined, the protagonist moves forward again, knowing there must exist some vital weak point that the enemy is unable to regenerate. With an extremely powerful and fast punch, the colossal demon hits Haruto square on and hurls him violently against the courtyard concrete. The creature mocks in a cruel and arrogant way, commenting that the spiritual sword is top tier, but its wielder is just a mediocre warrior. Haruto coughs blood and leans on the ground with extreme difficulty to try to stand up after taking that devastating attack from the enemy. The demon stands surprised to see the boy alive and realizes the youth instinctively concentrated his spiritual energy to survive the fatal impact, calling him an insolent brat. The monster walks calmly in Haruto's direction to deliver the mercy blow and finish the combat. The youth uses his last strength to block the new devastating blow with his sword, feeling all the crushing weight of the creature's strength. The impact's force is so great that the protagonist is thrown far away once more, rolling violently across the wet asphalt. The demon fiercely advances once again and asks itself annoyed how long that small human will manage to keep resisting its attacks. The demon notices the boy isn't just defending, but that his red eyes manage to track the speed of blows to deflect the impact, with a dark and powerful aura glowing around it. The monster admits the boy is quite troublesome and decides it's going to end him once and for all. Kusabi falls from a portal directly onto the hospital terrace and notices none of the enemy's allies seem to be ambushing around there. He notices immense marks of fresh blood scattered across the terrace floor and starts worrying about what might have happened there. Suddenly, heavy chains descend at high speed from the sky in Kusabi's direction. Forcing the professor to react quickly to dodge, Kusabi delivers a fast slash with his sword to try to break the chain, but feels the blow passed straight through it like air. The professor stands shocked, seeing his blade cut through metal without causing any damage. Realizing that weapon is intangible, the mysterious Straw Hat caster appears attacking and coldly warns he will spill the professor's blood right there on the terrace. Kusabi manages to block the enemy's direct attack, but the impact generates a strong collision that makes the two warriors test their strength in the rain. The caster smoothly steps back with his floating chains around, and merely lets out a mutter of disdain upon seeing Kusabi's endurance. Suddenly, Yuma appears walking calmly from behind, and asks with a sarcastic smile if the professor is okay after the teleportation. Kusabi thanks him for the earlier rescue, apologizing for the situation. While Yuma merely agrees calmly with his head, the elite hunter holds tightly to his sword hilt, revealing spiritual marks of branches and vines wrapped all around his arm. The caster deduces Yuma's blade has the wood attribute with regenerative power, which explains how he survived a cut to the torso. Yuma confirms, laughing, and comments that it only took him a while to get back to combat, because he had been thrown really far by the previous attack. Kusabi shouts for his ally, but Yuma tells him not to worry about him and to return immediately to protect the students down below. The enemy blocks Kusabi's path with intangible chains and ironically warns he has zero intention of letting him escape from there. With a malevolent smile, the villain reveals the special-level demon must already be devouring the students and that the two should stay there watching. He stares at the two hunters mockingly, warning in a terrifying tone that he will keep them very busy on the terrace until the feast ends. Extremely irritated by the enemy's cruelty, Kusabi curses the opponent while Yuma extends his arm to keep him under control. Yuma asks his friend not to fall for cheap provocations and suggests they join forces to end that enemy once and for all. The villain agrees with the proposal and mocks, saying that if the students are very lucky, maybe they can manage to survive for 30 seconds on their own. Yuma smiles confidently and proudly answers that he and Kusabi graduated from the same academy, telling the enemy not to underestimate their rookies. Back in the courtyard, the demon delivers an insane sequence of high-speed punches against Haruto, shouting that his movements are far too slow. The protagonist is hit head-on and thrown against the wall with extreme violence, making the other students shout in terror upon seeing the scene. Haruto tries to reason amid pain, realizing the enemy's strength surpasses his, and that his slicing technique is useless if he can't even hit. While the demon stares at him with a murderous look, the hero knows it will be the end if he keeps getting cornered, needing to find an urgent opening. Suddenly, a wind spell called Wind Needle hits the combat site forcefully, catching the special-level monster totally by surprise. Right after, a colossal ring of fire called Wheel of Flames completely wraps the creature, creating a barrier of intense heat around it. Funo and Inari enter the fight to provide support, shouting for Haruto to leave the rest to them, while the hero scarily shouts his companions' names. Haruto tries to warn that the opponent is far too dangerous for being special level, but Inari answers with determination that that's exactly why they came. He smiles with determination and states they would never just stand around watching, as everyone is part of the same hunter team. Inari honestly admits he and Funo alone don't have enough strength to deal fatal damage to that gigantic demon, but has a plan. He says the pair can at least create the perfect distraction the protagonist needs, making Haruto confidently agree with their strategy. With forces renewed by his team companion's help, Haruto swiftly advances against the opponent and asks his friends to help him. The demon crosses Inari's flames without taking a single scratch and mocks, saying a simple wall of fire wouldn't be capable of even slowing it down. Funo quickly takes position and conjures her serpent rain magic, launching a large amount of water jets in the creature's direction. Water contact with flame heat generates a massive steam curtain, leaving the special-level demon confused amid that fog. Even without being able to see properly due to all the steam around it, the special-level monster remains calm and grumbles that the tactic is foolish. Haruto pops up, suddenly descending from the middle of the steam, right above the monster's head, thinking to himself that this is the only opening he needed. The demon tries to strike back, thinking it was going to decapitate the boy, but stands in shock, realizing it hit only a puppet made entirely of water. With a mocking and victorious smile, Funo reveals from afar that it was merely her water dummy used to deceive the opponent's senses. Taking advantage of the perfect distraction generated by his ally, the real Haruto resurfaces from behind and delivers an extremely violent slash to the enemy. Inari and Funo watch the scene anxiously from the courtyard, desperately hoping that blow was enough to bring down the monster. Although the blow heavily wounded the creature's shoulder and gushed tons of purple blood, the demon still stands on its feet with a threatening look. The special-level demon backs off a bit and leans on the ground to contain the bleeding, keeping its guard high against the group's counterattack. To everyone's surprise, the deep wound on the creature's shoulder begins closing instantly with dark smoke, healing the monster. Inari stands terrified seeing that, and scarily comments that the arm Haruto had cut regenerated before the piece even hit the ground. Before the scared eyes of the young hunters, the colossal demon releases an even denser and more terrifying malevolent aura, looking like an unbeatable monster. In very few seconds, the opponent's arm rebuilds itself completely without leaving any scar, proving it has absurd regeneration. The monster seriously reflects on combat and admits to itself that it was caught by surprise by humans on 3 different occasions. So far, the special-level demon acknowledges the youth's strength and says that, although humiliating, it will accept this fact and fight with everything to eliminate them. The demon throws a piece of its own severed hand in Funo's direction at high speed, leaving the girl in a dangerous situation. Funo tries not to get distracted and concludes that must be just a trick to draw her attention away from the opponent's main body, deciding to dodge calmly, sensing the real danger of that bizarre attack. Haruto desperately shouts for Funo to dodge the projectile as fast as possible. The severed hand begins glowing intensely with an unstable purple and red energy, revealing it is about to detonate violently. The limb piece explodes with devastating force, covering the entire area in dark smoke and dust, hitting the students. The demon smiles macabrely and activates its technique called 5 explosive limbs, stating that from now on, it won't hold back anymore. Funo collapses on the ground, severely injured and bleeding, realizing in horror that the creature's terrible skill consists of exploding parts of its own body. Funo thinks she only survived because Haruto's warning gave her time to erect an onmyojutsu barrier, but still took catastrophic damage. Haruto looks horrified at the scene of destruction and realizes the demon is already preparing to launch its next explosive attack. The opponent brutally advances and warns the next explosive attack is already on its way, aiming directly in Haruto's direction. The hero sees the demon using another limb to attack him and thinks about dodging, but realizes something terrible right behind him. Haruto desperately realizes that if he decides to dodge the projectile, the deadly explosion will hit Inari head-on right behind him. Without another alternative to save his best friend, the protagonist roars in anger and decides to take the impact of the attack head-on. The overwhelming explosion completely consumes Haruto in a cloud of purple smoke and dust, causing a terrible crash at the site. The hero emerges extremely wounded, bleeding heavily from his body and gritting his teeth to endure the intense pain he feels after the impact. The demon laughs sadistically seeing the protagonist down and comments it already imagined the boy would act like a shield to protect his ally. The monstrous creature prepares another one of its devastating detonations in the courtyard to put an end once and for all to any chance of youth resistance. Seeing his friend's terrible state, Inari shouts the protagonist's name in total despair upon realizing the critical situation he is in. The monster laughs loudly at the novice hunter's tragedy and mockingly talks in a cruel way about how human beings are fragile creatures. Funo watches the scene from afar in a complete state of shock and denies what she is seeing, unable to believe Haruto ended up taking so much damage lying on the wet asphalt and covered in blood. The young warrior can barely whisper in pain while realizing he no longer has strength to fight. Inari quickly turns to his team classmate and asks with much distress if she knows and can use any healing onmyojutsu magic. Funo timidly answers that healing isn't her specialty, but admits she can perform a basic spell if she receives coverage. With a determined smile, Inari says that's perfect and begs her to try healing Haruto at least a little to save his life. He turns in the direction of the terrible demon and firmly warns he will fight to buy the maximum time possible for Funo to do the work. Funo apprehensively reflects on the desperate situation, knowing no one there has the slightest chance of winning if the protagonist is defeated. Inari realizes the other students are paralyzed with terror and knows that, not having healing gifts, his only duty now is to act as a distraction. The youth roars wrapped in intense flames, shouting that he trusts their fate to Funo, because he knows very well he won't manage to hold out for long. Concentrating her spiritual energy to begin the healing spell, the girl merely agrees with a serious look focused on her important task. Haruto watches the scene helplessly from the floor, cursing his own body for not moving a single millimeter, while Inari challenges that special class monster. Inari takes a deep breath to control fear and provokes the opponent, promising to show that even a mere appetizer can be extremely dangerous. With a fast charge, the green-haired youth executes his special technique, Shimmering Mist, creating several fire illusions to confuse the monster. The demon dodges the fake attacks with ease and mockingly comments that technique is far too slow and without any strength to hurt it. The monster decides to stop playing with illusions and cruelly orders Inari to try attacking using his real physical body if he has the courage. The creature analyzes the blow and realizes Inari is trying to hide his real body amid the heat mist, considering it all a cheap trick. As he moves amid flames, Inari recalls the previous detonation and thinks that if it were just regular dust, he would have managed to dodge the blow. The youth finally realizes with sorrow that he only came out unscathed from that big explosion because Haruto used his own body to protect him from taking the impact. He remembers when they said they were just fake friends and curses Haruto, calling him an idiot for risking his own life for real because of that. Inari swears to buy the necessary time at any cost, mentally begging for Haruto not to pass away, and for them to leave that underworld alive. However, the colossal demon manages to track the energy and grabs Inari's arm forcefully, revealing it discovered where the real body was. Inari panics seeing he was caught precisely by the hand that had been severed before, not understanding how the monster unraveled his strategy. Without giving the slightest chance of escape to the young hunter, the special-level demon initiates the detonation of the hand, firmly holding Inari lying on the floor and unable to do anything to stop the tragedy. Haruto widens his eyes in complete terror upon seeing the imminent danger his friend faces. The green-haired youth is completely consumed by the point-blank detonation and lets out a terrible scream of agony that echoes across the entire hospital, feeling unbearable pain all over his body that almost makes him pass out. Inari curses his own choice of trying to act like a hero foolishly. The demon mocks the boy's injured body, coldly explaining that the energy flow of the illusions gave away his position and that he now can barely hear. Satisfied with the damage, the special class monster turns back to Haruto and warns the protagonist will be its first official sacrifice. Consumed by hatred over seeing the state of his best friend, the hero desperately tries to force his own body to stand up to keep fighting. Surprising the enemy, Inari stands up staggering and bleeding heavily, furiously shouting that the monster hasn't finished eating its appetizer yet. Even with his body completely destroyed by flames and explosions, the young hero advances in a final act of bravery, bellowing that he will face the monster. The demon finds that scene pathetic and mockingly asks if there's any point in continuing to get up while trembling in pure pain and terror. Drops of blood fall onto the asphalt, and Inari admits to himself that he knows better than anyone that acting in this heroic way isn't his style. However, he resolutely refuses to abandon a friend who risked his own life without hesitating just to protect him from the explosion. Shedding tears of rage and with fire coming out of his mouth, the green-haired youth furiously shouts that he would never fall so low as to run away. Meanwhile, Funo continues the healing spell on Haruto and thinks about how trusting their fate to the protagonist and believing in him is the best choice. The protagonist begins opening his eyes slightly, and the girl concludes that making this bet on Haruto is the only smart play in that situation. Inari charges against the monster with all his strength and determinedly shouts that a once-in-a-lifetime bet is something on which you must throw everything you have. The special class demon considers that a huge foolishness and easily strikes back against the attack, crushing the ground and throwing Inari far away. The monster approaches the defeated Inari on the ground and mockingly says it understands the boy's enthusiasm in wanting to be the first to be consumed. Opening its gigantic mouth and salivating with hunger, the creature cruelly warns it will do the favor of granting this last wish to the young hero. Haruto desperately tries to move his body and shouts for the monster to stop. Begging to manage to move in time to save his best friend, Haruto's mind enters a state of absolute panic, repeating endlessly for his body to move and run much faster to save him. With his red eyes glowing intensely with fury and despair, the young hunter mentally screams, commanding his muscles to move once and for all. In the blink of an eye, an extremely powerful cut of energy hits the special class demon's face right when it was about to attack. The monster is forced to jump backward urgently and holds its wounded and bleeding face, looking surprised without understanding what just happened. Haruto emerges, standing wrapped in dark fog, and thanks Inari for believing in him, holding tightly to the hilt of his manifestation blade. The demon stands in complete shock and asks itself, terrified, how the injured boy managed to cover that huge distance in a fraction of a second. With a dark and intimidating look, the protagonist stares at the enemy and firmly promises his friend Inari that he will definitely save him from that monster. The monster notices Haruto's spiritual weapon and asks itself, terrified, if that manifestation blade wrapped in black fog was already like that. The entity Muten observes the scene and reveals that the reason Haruto managed to obtain the 10 Claws technique was because of his intense desire. The sword god explains that the strong spiritual longing the youth carried in his chest was the key to unlocking that destructive power before now. With a massive wave of intense emotions running through the protagonist's veins, a new spiritual energy begins emanating in a violent manner. Muten concludes, wondering if all this despair and fury will make Haruto manage to reach and master a new claw of power from his blade. The stage is set for a clash that will determine the fate of everyone involved.